Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DaCosta, and this is Consistent Preterism. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be real brief here in the opening comments. I had a little bit of time, which doesn't come very often. Doesn't happen very often these days with everything that's going on. But I did have a little bit of time, and I wanted to take a look at a recent video that Derek over at Mythvision put out, where he speaks about Dr. Richard Carrier and his Israel Only project. And he talks with James Valiant, who is the author of Creating Christ. And I think that they have an interesting dialogue. I've listened to maybe the first 30 or 40 minutes of it. And so I just wanted to kind of interact with it, engage it. Valiant has some points that he makes about I.O. that I'd like to talk about, which I think they maybe make a little bit too much of a fuss over and ignore, the backdrop of everything else. So I just kind of wanted to engage it a little bit. And if you hear some noises in the background, you will hear noises in the background because I have my two dogs. One is a bulldog. He's licking his paws right now. So he, he's in his little cage with his bed. And the other is a little Chihuahua and Shih Tzu mix. And she's adorable, very small, very wild little girl. And she's got a bone in her paws and she's chewing away. So you'll hear it kind of smacking against the floor. I hope it's not that annoying. You might also hear the air conditioning system kick back on. But other than that, we should be good to go. So let's just jump right into it. This is the beginning of the video. There might be some music or sound effects here. And then we're just going to talk a little bit about, what's being said and have a look-ski. So here we go.
What's up, everybody? Derek Lambert, Mythvision podcast. You can see I've just moved in, so let's let some people roll in here. I'm going to get some stuff ready, and I wanted to touch on some things. It's been a minute since I've done any interaction with you guys, so I want to touch base with you, let you know what's going on. And thanks a lot for everybody who's been patient. Yes, it seems like it's been a Dr. Price show. I know, there's been a lot of Dr. Price. He lives an hour from me. Can you blame me for wanting to drive over there, take my camera, and film the gentleman in person, pick his brain? He's doing a lot better, by the way. So let me pull up these comments, see if I can see everybody who might be commenting, watching the show. And we're going to touch on some interesting subjects today just to give you guys an idea of where we're going with Mythvision. So give me about 20-30 seconds. I will be having a guest join me here in just a minute. We'll have him on the screen as well. And I want to do a lot more of this interactive stuff here on Mythvision podcast, bringing you scholars and letting you guys ask them questions yourself. These are people who they're experts in their field, particularly on the subject matter we're going to discuss. I want to bring a lot more scholars to Mythvision, so be on the lookout for that. Let me check out, make sure I got everything going here. Here we go. Pulling up my...
I got to tell you, Derek's, he's a clever kid. If you don't know Derek's got another channel on substance abuse and addiction and stuff like that. And I believe he's got quite a few subscribers over there. So he's got the Mythvision thing going on, which he's grown to almost 6,000 subs. And then he's got the other page. So... he's good at what he does. I mean, he's smart. He knows how to get views. He knows how to get subs. Obviously, his videos are cool with the graphics. And so I say that first off to say kudos to him. Good job. But I also say that to say that there is something more. Excuse me, I just got a text. Let me just respond. Sorry, guys. All right, so one more second and we're good. So what I wanted to say about that is that, when you got something good going, okay, you're not going to be as likely to accept something. Now, Derek comes right out and says in this video that he's open to I.O., that I.O. has a lot of strong points. Like, he gives I.O. its props, like Derek's not 100% against I.O., but you'll always also hear Derek express his concerns about some of the things in the view. And and just say that he can't fully jump on board because there's things that he just doesn't understand, right? And that's fine. I'm not here to say that he should jump on board, and everybody has their own opinion. Everybody can make their own choices, and in the end, it's got to be what feels best for him, right? But I do think that having a channel that has so much potential. Now let's face it. Some of Derek's videos here on Mythvision have 20,000 views. In the world of YouTube monetization, that can end up getting somewhere where he could make some good side money. He could maybe get it to a point where he makes real good money. And please don't take this the wrong way. I'm just saying that he's got a show to run, and I think he's smart by bringing Israel only into the picture, because he's got a nice platform there, and he can start getting the theories and the ideas and the proofs out. But I think that's why you'll always have some hesitation, and it's not as easily accepted. But regardless, he has a really good thing going, and let's continue with it.
YouTube here, because StreamYard is what I'm running this through, and I don't know if you guys can hear or see me. Maybe you can comment, let me know that you guys can hear and see me. All right, it says I'm live, but my thumbnail is not looking too spiffy. I had a thumbnail in mind here, so let me start this, I guess, over, because the thumbnail's not it's not up like I thought it would be. Maybe I need to do that? I don't know. There's a way to change it. Look, I'm going to get back on this live here. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to cancel this out, guys. Be on the lookout. I'm going to have another live pop up, but I'm actually going to have my thumbnail correct so people know that this is a live going on. I can get you guys. Oh, wow. There's a lot of people just popped.
Oh, come on, D. I just gave you props, and now you're going to go another live? No, I'm just kidding. He's just getting squared away. I didn't really know where they started talking about I.O., so I just played it from the top, but we're already a couple minutes in, so it's probably coming up anytime soon.
So. Okay, guys, you're here. Perfect. I just was wondering where everybody's at. Maybe it's the thumbnail or something. All right. Everybody's on Facebook and YouTube. I'm on both here, and I wanted to bring you guys some stuff. We got 26 people in right now. I have a project that has been on my heart for quite some time. I do a lot of that on Mythvision. I know a lot of you guys may not care for some of the subjects that might get brought up, and then some of you guys are like, wow, I never even knew that or never thought of that, and that's exciting. I never even thought that was even an idea. That's kind of what I'm all about. I don't really spend too much time dealing with epistemology and arguments for why people believe in things and, just critiquing people's faiths and stuff. There's plenty of channels out there for stuff like that. What I like to do is hear crazy people like Dr. Price. Practically, he's drawing up my adoption papers. Every time I go over there, he's like, son, come sit down, son. Santa Claus is going to give you your presents. But no, he practically is ready to adopt me as a son, if you will. Just because he loves me, man. I love him too. The guy's full of information. But
yeah, he's got a pretty cool relationship with Dr. Price, except for when he asks him about I.O.
But, when you hear a guy say that Yahweh created the world from the carcass of Leviathan, who the hell says that kind of stuff? Where are you going to hear this at? I mean, this is supposedly in one of the source materials from the Old Testament or Hebrew scriptures, that there's a place where God creates everything from the carcass of Leviathan. What the heck is going on, guys? I mean, who do you know talks like that? So Mythvision Podcast has this interesting theoretical stance on presenting new ideas and various ideas to you. How many times have I been wrong? How many times did I think I had the answers and then found out there are flaws in my position and said, damn it, I got to tear down the walls, all these giant walls that I built, thinking that I was right. Now my ego has to deflate. Now I have to pretend like, oh, well, I got to try and somehow humble myself to accept that the ideas I once held as true may not be so true.
Now, Derek brings up a very, very good point here. It's very humbling to, come into a position and to realize you were wrong, okay? But I think the one thing that maybe coming from futurism into preterism does for a person is it actually it kind of puts you in a progressive learning mode. I don't know if I'm wording that correctly, but basically what I mean is you're moving forward. You're not moving backwards. So you're you know that you're on the right track. You know that you've discovered a major piece of the puzzle, that being the fulfillment aspect. And so you're on a journey forward. And so I feel like the changes that are made for someone who comes from a futurist Christian background, I should say, and adopts the fulfilled theology viewpoint, those types of changes force a person to take a harder look at the story. So you're probably on the right track if you're making a change like that. But he's right. I mean, it's tough to settle into a position, because if you're wrong, which a lot of times you're not completely wrong, a lot of times you might have some pieces wrong, but if you're wrong, then you have to go through the whole thing of, oh, well, I was wrong, right? You end up looking like an asshat. So it does happen. It's part of it, I guess. But the one thing that I like to do is look at, okay, for Israel only, for example, I look at the story and I say, well, there's only so many options we have here, right? And it seems like they're all centered around just the 12 tribes being gathered in. So I like to look at that and then compare the evidence to that and see, to see if that theory sticks, to see if it holds up. And so when I plant my flag in a particular view like Israel only, I do so with the understanding that, I've scoured the New Testament pages. I've scoured the Old Testament pages. And this is the only logical conclusion that I can make based upon the totality of evidence. That's when I stick my pole in there. And I stick my pole in there acknowledging fully that could change here and there. It could change a little bit. It's not going to change completely. I'm never going to pull that pole out of the ground and say, Gentiles can now come back in, because I've done the work. I've scoured. There's nothing there that would suggest that. But what might happen is I might modify a few details of how I understand the narrative, but the framework will still remain, that kind of thing. So, but Derek makes a very good point there.
May not be the case. And I'm willing to do that with new ideas, even if I am wrong about my ideas right now. But I'm going to test it. I'm not just going to accept what I'm being told because something sounds right, or it might appear to me and what I see is right, and I'll continue to test. Now, I've got 32 of you guys on my end. I don't know if there's more of you watching or not. Let me see if you got more here going on. So I see 29 people watching, guys. I just want to let you know, and I'm going to have to update this thumbnail because most people probably just see Mythvision and not even know that this is a live going on right now, me touching base with you guys. I literally moved in. As you can see, I've got boxes. I'm not even done unpacking in my house. There is a project right now that we just met the goal on. Fingers crossed, everything goes smooth. Dr. Richard Carrier is going to be coming on the show to do a couple shows on this idea called Israel only. Not only is he going to do a couple shows, he's going to write a thorough article delving into the position, pros and cons, and what he finds out about it. If you guys don't know much about him, Dr. Richard Carrier once was a historicist, and crowdfunding allowed him to delve with undivided attention into the view of, did Jesus Christ actually exist historically? Or is he an angelic figure, a fictional being of an angelic sort, something to that effect, the Doherty thesis? And after deep investigation, he came out saying, this is a highly probable position, according to his view. I, of course, am open-minded to that being wrong as a host. I'm very open-minded. But Dr. Carrier has written a couple books, and they are peer-reviewed. He has on the historicity of Jesus, and I know that he has delved deeply into these subjects. Well, why not have him delve into another subject called Israel only? And that position, I'm not going to go into extensive detail, but I want to read to you guys something that...
Okay, my dog is now licking his paws like he does sometimes, and you can probably hear it. All right, so if you hear that, just sorry about that.
I actually found written by a IO proponent. You might go, what the hell what the hell is IO? What is Israel only? What is this idea? It's this harmonization method. It's this overarching satellite view of the Bible that from Genesis to Revelation, all it's about is the biological, genetic kinship relationship of Abraham and his seed.
Well, not all that it's about. That's of course the most important part, but you have many side stories kind of intertwining with that main narrative that runs down the center of it. So yes, it is you don't have to try to harmonize it. It does it itself.
And that from him many nations will come, and that these nations are ultimately the elect among these nations will be redeemed. Now,
well, back that up real quickly. So in Genesis, I think it's 47, 48, where the promise is made that Ephraim would become a multitude of nations, right? So right in the beginning of the story, before we get into the nuts and bolts of Israel's journey, we have that promise that literally the northern kingdom, Ephraim, would become a multitude of nations. So is it far-fetched to say that the nations are actually Israel who are being gathered in, right? No, it's not far-fetched at all. It's actually what the story sets you up to believe. It's the natural trajectory of the story. And again, I repeat that the Israelites, in the very beginning, before we get into the focusing on their journey, are actually promised to become a multitude of nations. We'll fast forward to the end real quick. You're in Romans, and you have Paul saying that when the fullness of the nations, right? Same phrasing, same wording, same concept that's used in Genesis is used here by Paul in Romans 11, and they're both talking about a fullness or a multitude of nations coming in. Well, in the beginning you have Israel being said that they were going to become a multitude of nations, and in the end you have Paul seeking out Israel, who he describes as a multitude of nations. Very easy to see.
Some of you guys might go, I don't want to hear this thing anymore. I'm tired of hearing about it. Some of you guys might have been rubbed wrong. But I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to discuss this.
You go, boy.
So if you don't like it, that's cool. We'll have other videos come out. But if you're like me and you really want a challenge, this is a theory I think is worthy of talking about. Here.
Now, I like that because prior to this, Derek was sort of, he was gentle about it. He was like, all right, well, I'm just going to sneak these little IL videos in and see what kind of reaction I get. And he got some good reaction, but he got a lot of haters. You could see the people in the comments. Now, granted, every video got a lot of likes, got a lot of views, but you could tell that people were a little bit upset that he's sharing things that actually tries to make sense of the biblical narrative, because most of the people that tune in have spent their lifetimes trying to skew it up and say that it doesn't make sense, right? For whatever reason, just religious assholes that they've came across throughout their lifetimes, experiences that they may have had throughout the years, whatever the case may be. But everybody has their own experiences with it. Okay? But in this particular video, Derek comes right out and he says, hey, whether you like it or not, I'm going to be sharing it because it deserves a fair look. And what you're going to find out in a little while, too, is that when he actually admits and reads a message from Dr. Richard Carrier, the esteemed doctor himself, and he says that he's open to the idea, and it does seem plausible. So you'll see that. But I want to keep getting into what Derek says and ultimately what James Valiant says, and see if we can, sort of put these things back into their proper place for these guys.
Here's why it's worthy of discussion. Not saying they're right, but another professional scholar, Dr. Jason Staples, which will be interviewed on Mythvision podcast, has written what is a new perspective or a fresh look at the Gentiles in Romans 9 through 11. Interesting, because there's four major views that float around on who the Gentiles are in Romans 11, and that all Israel shall be saved. That's an interesting concept. Is he saying that the Gentiles are part of Israel? And in what manner does that matter? How is that real? So you go to history and you go to fiction and you're trying to find out where these things mix. Well, Dr. Staples has written an article. He's writing 2 books right now and has written 3 blogs on Dr. Ehrman's post on his position. Now, I've, of course, pitched this to the Israel-only guys on Facebook and said, now's your chance, guys. Now's your chance. You harped on Dr. Price. I understand Dr. Price had answered a hip-fire question, had no time to prepare, but...
Hip-fire question, no time to prepare. When Dr. Price was asked about the IO basic principles, he looked like a deer in headlights. He's a sweetheart of a guy, let me tell you, but he wasn't prepared for what IO packed, right? When IO whipped it out, his jaw dropped because, again, it's one of those things where you don't see it until you see it, right? It's been there all along. You've read over these things a million times, but somebody had to come and kind of tweak your bifocals, had to tweak your perspective a little bit just so you could catch it in its right light. And then once you caught it in the right light, then you could see the story for what it was. And when we looked at Robert Price, when Derek was interviewing him on that show a couple weeks back, and Derek hit him with the Romans 9, and he was reading Romans 9, it was almost as if the light bulb went off in his head, right? I mean, very intelligent guy, a wealth of information. But it almost looked like this was the first time that he was understanding the passage. And so at the end of the program, you had a very serious request from him to Derek that he didn't want to talk about Israel only again. Now, I don't know about you, but the great Bob Price doesn't usually get very flustered, right? He doesn't say that about Bart Ehrman's theories or anything. But something about this very simplistic theory just kind of shook him a little bit, and he does not want to see it again. So, you can always tell, right? Now, I'm not saying Price has to debate I.O. or even get into it with I.O., but why not on his own pace, at his own terms, or on his own terms, at his own pace? Why not answer some of Derek's questions and explain it? But this is why. It's because they're too, like the I.O. view takes the Bible and actually understands it, puts it where it needs to be, explains what is actually going on. The myth guy doesn't do any of that. The myth guy sets out to prove that it doesn't make any sense, that it's borrowed information, or whatever the case may be, that it never happened. Right? So you're really kind of arguing two things here. So when you ask a myth guy to disprove an I.O. guy, it doesn't work out. Right? It doesn't work out because the myth guy is clearly not going to be as good in the scriptures as the I.O. guy, and the I.O. guy is not going to be as good outside of the scriptures as the myth guy, right? So you're trying to put two things together that really don't mesh, which will be interesting to see what Carrier comes up with when he investigates Israel only. I mean, you can, like I said, you can only take this story so far, and chances are, I'm willing to bet that he's going to miss the eschatological implications of the New Testament and therefore miss the entirety of what's actually taking place. But I may have gone down a rabbit trail. Let's continue.
I know that they scoffed and said it didn't answer, didn't touch the Israel only position.
Well, it didn't.
But when you actually look at what critical scholars think about this, in real history, the northern tribes that were scattered, so to speak, in the Assyrian conquest, a lot of them went south. So technically, the consummation of the 12 tribes was in the south, at least to some extent. The reality was that whatever remained into the first century must have been a Jew by the first century.
Yeah, but that doesn't make sense because we have statements from Josephus himself, which Dr. Jason Staples quotes as well, and I've been quoting this one for years, that in the first century when he wrote, the northern tribes were beyond the Euphrates. They were still to this day beyond the Euphrates. And guess how large and how immense they were? Well, Josephus calls them the same thing that Revelation 14, or Revelation 7, calls them. He calls them a great multitude, far too great to be numbered. So Derek says that scholars think that there was, that they had migrated south, right? And that they would have all been Jews. But yet here's Josephus saying that the 10 tribes are beyond the Euphrates and a great multitude far too big to number. And again, I stress the fact that is exactly the exact terminology that Hosea the prophet uses for Israel and that John uses for Israel in Revelation 7 when he describes them as a great multitude from the nations, right? That's Josephus is far beyond the Euphrates, great multitude from the nations, and they both agreed that they were far too large to estimate. Okay, so the symmetry is eye-popping. and there's no coincidences here. This is, in fact, talking about Ephraim, northern kingdom, Genesis 48, coming, back from the nations. He became a multitude of nations, and here he is coming back. Okay, now, I'm going to bring up this point again in a little while, but Derek and James Valiant and others, they're guilty of accusing IOers of making some radical claims. In other words, they say, well, how could Israelites still be in the nations without having assimilated, right? And all this. Meanwhile, they argue that this whole story's nonsense, right? They don't believe it actually happened. They don't believe the supernatural tales of the story. But yet they're arguing against IO because we claim that Israelites came back from the nations. Well, if you're saying that all the supernatural stuff didn't happen, then why couldn't this be the message? In other words, why couldn't it be saying that Israelites were coming back? That's just as supernatural as the other stuff. We're going to get into that a little bit more. I'll hopefully be able to explain that a little better once. I think it's Valiant that says something, but let's continue here.
There was no diaspora lost, uncircumcised remnants out there of Israelites according to real history. Now,
well, what about Josephus, right? What about James? James wrote to the 12 tribes scattered abroad, right? What about Peter writing to the dispersed ones in the nations, Pontus, Galatia, Asia, right? What about those ones? What about the promise that Peter made in Acts 2 that the Holy Spirit would go far and wide and it was only for Israel? What about Jesus saying that he has sheep not of this fold? What about Caiaphas saying that he died not only for the sons of God in the nation, but also the sons of God scattered abroad? You see, you have all this proof, this New Testament proof, along with all the proof of the Old Testament and how it predicts this as happening, as going to happen. You also have proof in the book of the Maccabees, which obviously is left out of the Protestant Bible, probably for good reason, probably purposely. But that book shows that just 100, 200 years before this Christ figure shows up, the Israelites were joining themselves with the Gentile nations. Okay, so you have all this stuff that sets up, right? In the book of the Maccabees, you see Israelites giving up circumcision, giving up the law, abandoning the Sabbath. Right? Interestingly enough, Paul comes along, ventures or writes to places like Colossae, and tells them that they were dead in the trespass of being uncircumcised in the flesh. Now, could this be a byproduct of that 100, 200 year prior, dispersion or movement out into the nations and giving up of circumcision, which the book actually says was literally happening? The Israelites were giving that up. Could this be a byproduct of that? Of course it probably is. Right? Of course it probably is, because there is historical proof that this was the case, unlike what Derek just said.
Now, I don't know what I'm talking about according to most of these people.
Well, I mean, what you just said wasn't true.
And I'm being sarcastic by saying this because I'm actually friendly with most of them. Some of them are sarcastic assholes, but...
That could be me.
When you get into these discussions, who isn't?
He's got a good point.
And I'm going to be having a friend of mine here join me here soon. He's in the lobby right now. But he's going to be talking about some of the stuff that was recently brought up on an interview with Jason DaCosta. So Jason DaCosta and me had a similar path. Let me give you guys a little background. I was a fundamentalist Christian, hardcore. Like, Jesus was my Lord and Savior. I asked him into my heart. I went to church. Like, I loved God, and I really read his word, and I believed every word of it. I even...
Same with me.
Went on air one time years ago. You ever see those Facebook memories pop up and you go, I said that? I actually said that.
That's part of the reason I got off Facebook. I couldn't look at it.
What the hell am I thinking? I said, if the Bible said that Jonah swallowed a whale, I would believe it. How freaking ridiculous does that sound now, okay? Very ridiculous, but I was passionate. I want you guys to feel my energy here. I loved the Bible. And it was one piece. It was 66 books. No, it wasn't. It was one book written by one author, God Almighty. And let me tell you, I went into that preachy stuff, right? Look, today I'm digging deep. Tell me what the sources say. tell me your criticisms. Tell me your pros, your cons. I'm open-minded. Because if I think I have the answer and I've come to my conclusion, get ready, Derek. You're going to have to get your chisel and your hammer and break down another damn wall, because you're going to keep building walls until you, I don't know, finally realize you don't know much. And if you want to know something, why don't you get into the field, learn the language, delve into the criticism, peer review, really test it out, and then at the end of the day, make your conclusion. That's what I'm about. Mythvision podcast is not just a podcast. It's a journey. It's a real serious inquiry on trying to know what the hell happened and what's going on. And
what the hell happened and what's going on? I love that line.
I want you guys to relate to me. I love this. I love this. I love the exploration of hypotheses, different theories. I love that, because as soon as
I do too. But what I don't love is I don't love hypotheses and theories and viewpoints that make no sense, that come to no conclusions, that have no framework, that are going nowhere. And honestly, a lot of these myth positions, they really don't. They can't explain what this story is about. They just say none of it makes sense. It all contradicts. Therefore, it's probably all written by other people. It's a conspiracy. Whatever the case may be, there's a million theories. Give me logic. Give me sensical arguments that make sense of what's actually said in the story, in the text, and I'll listen. But I haven't heard any yet.
As soon as you think you got it, you're going to read another book and go, does that really, can I really make that marry? Let me try to make that harmonize? Or are these different authors with different points of view that are trying to present something and sometimes even attack another view within the canon itself? Oh, no, that can't happen.
I love how they act like this disagreement between Paul and James or whoever they cite is like, it's like it's almost as if these guys have never had any beef in their life, right? Like, how many times have you fought with your own friend over something? I mean, I know I have. I've come to blows with friends of mine back in the day when I was a kid. Not so much anymore. I think I threw somebody in a box once about maybe 12 years ago. That was the last time I got into any real beef. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that you'll hear Derek and James and everybody, they're like, oh God, Paul and James had a disagreement. Oh no, this has to be bullshit. This has to be, a conspiracy or whatever. It's like, really? Really? Like, you've never had a disagreement with one of your acquaintances, one of your coworkers? Like, hello? Right? So that's not a good argument. They also try to beef up this whole, things don't make sense. Things clash. There's a lot of contradictions in the New Testament and stuff. But, let's face it. If there wasn't contradictions, if it was all uniform, okay, then we probably wouldn't be as interested in it, right? But it's not all uniform. You have letters written from supposedly different people, letters written to different places. Now, Derek actually even believes that a lot of these letters were really written to people in these places. So you have these letters written to different regions, different locations, different people, written by different people. And you mean to tell me that you're not going to have things that might somehow clash, might somehow, bump into each other a little bit? But what's even more amazing is actually how much of it does make sense. What's even more amazing is that the wide majority of the stuff that you find in the New Testament actually does make sense. It actually does fit with other passages in other books, right? You see Paul, for instance, writing to the Corinthians in verse 10, 1 Corinthians 10. And he says that all of our fathers passed through the Red Sea and were baptized into Moses. So your mind should say, okay, well, wow, that's interesting. He's referring to their fathers, these Corinthians, and he's saying that their fathers passed through the Red Sea. So were their fathers the 12 tribes? Were they the Israelites? Right? And so then you go over to places like James, and you see James writing to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Or you see Peter writing to the dispersed in all these nations, right? That's just one example. But you also see them working for the gospel cause, right? I mean, you obviously had two different parties, Jew and Gentile, and that distinction is made very known. And a lot of focus is put on that because, again, you had such radical positions, such cultural associations there, right? Two totally polar opposite views, Jew and Gentile. and you're trying to bring certain individuals from those two parties together to form a new man. Trust me, that's not probably for the faint of heart. So the fact that these guys like to look at a little bit of a disagreement, or look at Paul saying, you don't need to do this because, for instance, the law. Okay, and I'm sure we'll get into this more as they talk. But with the law, these guys like to look at the law, and they like to say, well, Paul wasn't for the law. Look at Paul; he's telling them they don't have to abide by the law, but they're not ebbing and flowing with the details of the story. They're just kind of like taking this rigid viewpoint, like, oh, Paul should have been for the law 100% of the time, right? There's no room for error, for ebb, for flow here with these guys. It's like it's got to be one way or the other. I see it more as a story of, say, Paul, who went to these locations, who went to these regions, and dealt with individuals. Right? Because he's the apostle to the nations, okay? So picture going to different nations. You have totally different cultures, totally different people groups. Everything's different in each little society, okay? And Paul's there, and he's trying to gather certain individuals in. And while he's there, a lot of times, he's dealing with both Jew and Gentile. Because remember, they'd assumed different lifestyles in all these regions. So he's working together to break all this down. And in places like Romans, he actually tells them, we don't forsake the law, we uphold it. Right? But at the same token, he's not going to tell a paganized, gentilized Israelite, that he has to be circumcised and join the all the precepts of the law system now. Right? That wasn't his message. His message was actually that Christ had nailed the handwritten requirements of the law to the cross. That Christ had fulfilled the law, that he was the end of the law to those who believed. So in other words, the message was good news because you're so far buried in trespasses and sins out here, is what he was telling them. But don't worry, because Christ has nailed those handwritten requirements to the cross. Right? Like he tells the Galatians, cursed is he who doesn't do all things written in the book of law. But he says Christ was hung on a tree for us. He was cursed for us, right? Because he fulfilled that requirement. So these are no doubt about it. These are Israelites. But when these guys argue that there's these little, differences in opinion by Paul and James over the law, they're not taking the big picture into consideration. They're not looking at the mission for what it was. It was an ingathering of different types of people. And Paul flat out says that he became, right, each man. In other words, to the Jews he became a Jew. To the Greeks he became a Greek. He was winning those elect ones back to God. He was convincing them. And he did it however he had to do it. That's the whole point of the story. So when Derek and James try to convince you that there's so many contradictions, they're full of it. They're totally full of it. Because there's not. There's not. There may be some. There may be some, but there's not a lot. And if you take those few and compare them to the things that actually do line up, to the things that actually do match, there's no comparison, because you have the same message being preached and being taught by all the authors of the New Testament. They all taught the same thing. They all looked forward to the same thing. They all knew that it was all coming to an end soon. They all knew that the end was at hand and that they were in the last days. They all preached the message of Jesus. They all preached the message of, he's the end of the law for us, right? They all said the same thing. But to Derek and James, oh, no, they said different things. But no, they didn't, okay? And we can get into that in depth. But right now we're going to continue.
This is God's word. Anyway, that being said, let me give you guys a little gist here. There's been a little, I guess you'd say, emotional battles going on. Little Facebook wars, YouTube chatter, all that kind of stuff over this theory. This theory needs to be dealt with, and it needs to be seriously analyzed. But Dr. Jason Staples comes close in some ways, but does not conclude what Israel only is saying, but actual diaspora Israelites in the first century. So to me, there's one of two types of positions ultimately that the Israel-only position is going to have to fall in. Fiction 100%, completely made-up story about fulfilling the...
Well, first of all, I've been a fiction guy for a long time, okay? If you go back and look at my videos, You can see that for at least the last year, I've been on the fiction bandwagon, and that I don't believe any of this stuff actually happened, okay? Now, it can't be fiction 100%, as Derek just said, because we know there's some historical truths and some historical documentation of events in there, like obviously, the battles and the rebuilding of Jerusalem and different wars. And so it's never going to be fiction 100%, right? There's got to be some kind of give and take there, because it is a history book in some sense too, okay? But I have been of the fictional mindset when it comes to the supernatural stuff that was incorporated into the story. That to me is just sort of them taking events that happened and adding supernatural fluff to them. But let's continue.
Connection of northern and southern Israel, called the two-house theory, or Paul thought maybe, look, they did accept the message, and if they accept the message, they must be somehow Israelites. But in reality, what is really going on? So that being said, we're going to bring a guest on here, guys. I didn't really read your guys' questions here or comments, but I love you guys, and thanks a lot for sticking around this long, because I'm passionate about this. You guys know I'm passionate about this, and if I wasn't, look, if this was about only what you guys wanted, and I'm out here making a living, which was an accusation that, oh, Derek only makes money doing Mythvision. Dude, this is my life, man. I love this.
Nobody's knocking that. I get it. I have the passion, too, to talk about the Bible just like Derek does. Derek's a little more into the wild, flaming purple unicorn type stuff, but I can understand the passion, and I can appreciate the passion and the addiction to want to figure shit out when it comes to this stuff. But, I mean, at the same token, don't act as if this isn't going to put money in your pocket. I mean, I don't know a lot about YouTube, but I know that, between his two channels, he's probably got well over 20,000 subscribers. And if you can get regular views and run ads, you can make a little bit of money. So it's totally fine. And I'm not saying that to insult him. If you can get it, go get it. As a matter of fact, I always said if my channel got up to a couple thousand subs, sorry for my doggy, if my channel got up to a couple thousand subs, I would consider putting on the monetization ads, because why not, right? It's 2020. We're in the age of COVID. Everything's going cyber, and, hey, if you can get money, why not try to get it? But I'm not there yet, but we'll see. But I mean, I don't knock him for doing that. I'm just saying, it's not, this is what I mean. It's not as if one day Derek's just going to say, you know what? IO makes way too much sense. I'm converting, or I'm adopting the IO viewpoint, and that's what we're going to talk about. No, that wouldn't happen, and I don't expect that to happen. But just know that alongside of that not happening has to come a mindset or an attitude from Derek that says, oh, well, everything's possible. All these views could be, meanwhile, I think he knows deep down that the one view that kind of sticks out above all the others is the IO view. And that'll be how it always is. And that's fine.
I do this every day. I eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. And it's a passion of mine. So I do like to listen to what you guys have to say. However, this is a personal journey of mine. I'm trying to figure it out. I've tested many theories. I bring it here. Even if I don't fully conclude the theory, I still present it. You guys might see something that I don't. Hey, Derek, have you thought about this? I haven't thought about that. Why is Israel only on my lips if I'm so against it? I'm not attacking it, but I am going to test it critically. And I'm looking at this, but I'm not the scholar in the field who can see the Greek, who really sees what's going on. And with that being said, I'm going to bring...
Oh, see the Greek. I mean, come on. It's like we all can understand the Greek, the lexicon, whatever you want to call it. We all understand how to look up things in the concordance, right? I mean, this isn't rocket science here, all right? So just because someone might be fluent in Greek or whatever the case may be, it means really nothing. At the end of the day, what's going to mean something is the person who can put together what the story says the best and make the most sense of it. That's it. Making the most sense of a story, right? We look at things and we try to make sense of them. That's what we do as human beings. But somehow with the Bible, it's like these myth guys, in particular on Mythvision, are looking at the Bible with the intent of not making sense of it. They want to look at it and keep skewing it, keep adding theories in, keep throwing things against the wall and seeing if they stick. but they're just getting further and further and further away from what it actually says. And so IO comes along and kind of says, hey, over here, look here, boom. And now you're locked in on it, and you can see it for what it is without all that cloudiness.
Bring on a friend of mine, James Valiant, author of Creating Christ. He's written the Creating Christ book. It's similar to Atwell in some sense. But I know that Jason DaCosta did a video recently talking about the Roman providence theory and how does it stand up in the grand scheme of the overarching picture. We're going to have James talk with me today about this. Like I said, before I bring him on, I'm not 100% sold on anything, right? Even his theory. We have wonderful conversations, but this guy's full of history and knowledge and information. Show him some love. James, here you are. Welcome, brother.
Hey, how you doing, Derek?
I'm doing, man.
I'm doing. Got myself properly, situated here.
Now, James is a sweetheart of a man, obviously. I mean, look at the guy. How could you not like the guy? But I got to tell you, some of his theories are kind of wackadoodle. And when he comments on a lot of the IO stuff, you almost kind of have to scratch your head, like, what does that have to do with IO? A lot of times he goes off on rants about, like, the Jews, and you're sitting there like, James, no one's talking about the Jews, okay? The Jews are just a portion of what we're talking about. That's Israel as a whole. But, I mean, good guy, right? He's a nice guy. He's friendly. He's got an infectious laugh and smile. And so I have no ill will against the guy. I just, in the world of, I guess, theology and critique, it is what it is. I mean, you got to do what you got to do. And I think that the Roman theory that he came up with, or that Joseph Atwell came up with, I think it lacks in many departments.
Shots fired, right?
Yeah, well, I haven't yet, to be straight, I haven't yet seen the video at all. I don't know what he says about Roman providence, and I'm looking forward to checking it out.
You're a flat earther. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I just put out a video last week about the Roman propaganda view, and how this view teaches that it was created by the Romans and it was a Flavian dynasty type of thing. And it got a little bit of attention, and I guess that's what he was talking about, shots fired. I really didn't shoot any or fire any shots at the view. I just kind of talked about it and explained how it just doesn't make any sense to me, why the Romans would create a story about the salvation of Israel. And especially if it was to unite people and create peace, why have it end at the destruction of the temple? I mean, that seems like it was over at that point, and that, that doesn't really work if you're trying to form a new system and create peace forever. Why remove these particular individuals off the earth and take them to a place prepared for them in, another world, basically?
But you're right. Well, let's. I'm not a flat earther.
I know. I'm just teasing you.
You see, at some level, we can say a theory is absurd, right? I mean, It's not that the truth is always up for grabs, but I generally agree with what you said. Every theory has to be critically tested. In other words, we have to entertain in our heads, could this be true? Could this be true? Could this be true? Only when we have, we put it this way, exhaustively considered the possibilities. And new possibilities are going to come up. And, even at the end of the day, if someone says my theory, Roman providence, is absurd, or that IO is absurd at the end of the day, the way we're going to find this out is by every theory, even weird, wrong theories, even theories that are dead wrong, a full hearing. The English philosopher John Stuart Mill said, sure, you want idiots with bad theories to get a loud megaphone and a big platform. The best thing that could happen for truth is for people who are dead wrong to be given a full hearing, and for the truth and for other people to engage with it. And so with my theory of Roman providence, I figured the way to do it would be to put all my best arguments, at least the essential fundamental arguments, into a book, and to write it just as carefully as I could, cite the sources that were influencing me, cite the original material that I was using, show pictures of the ancient coins that I was using as I'm discussing it, present my theory as carefully and as clearly as I could, and then submit it to every scholar in the field, mythicist or historicist, Jew, Christian, atheist, everyone out there who's interested in this topic, who expressed any interest. And I'd go out there and say, you want to read this book? I got this theory. And what's interesting is that we've kind of challenged IO to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Give us your definitive statement of this. Give us your best arguments, at least your most...
It's interesting how such bright and intelligent guys like this just are desperately crying out for a book on IO. And sorry for the snoring and the breathing in the back. That's my pup. But, Debo, come on, buddy. Hold on 1 second. Let me just take care of him so he doesn't snore anymore here. Anyways, I think it's just interesting how these guys, they desperately want a book. And, it's like it's 2020, man. Come on, you can't listen to a YouTube video. You can't listen to a YouTube presentation. Valiant says he cites historical, quotes and shows pictures of his coins and all this stuff and historians and scholars, whatever. Well, IO does much of the same, but we just don't have a book written about it, right? Now, the other thing is this IO viewpoint it's been around for a lot longer than people think. All right, I mean, this isn't just some new idea that popped up on the scene. Here comes my bulldog. It's not. This isn't a new position. But IO does do these things. We just haven't written a full book on it yet. I think some people plan to. I know that would be a huge undertaking because not only are you presenting a new view, but you're also trying to untangle the web of confusion that's been built up throughout the centuries. So there's a lot of things that need to be addressed in order to present a view like that, which is why I personally haven't stepped forward and tried to do something on the topic. Perhaps I will, but I am not a scholar, and so I'm just a kind of like Derek. I'm just a passionate truth seeker when it comes to these types of things. And so I don't know that I'm exactly the man for the job. I think I'm good at what I do. I verbally express the position well enough where it doesn't cut into my life, because I do have a busy life. It doesn't cut into my life, but it also allows me to get the message out clearly. So these are intelligent guys, and they should be able to pick up on something very quickly. And I think they do. I think that this cry for a book is just a way that they could sort of claim victory over the idea, because, hey, if the IO guys don't want to write a book, then it's probably not true, right?
Most fundamental ones. Put it together and send it to scholars, offer it for critical response from real experts. Yeah, who know the history, who know the languages. Absolutely, that's what you've got to do. And you've got to present it to a variety of viewpoints. And you've got to be willing to accept. So my whole approach with creating Christ was write the best book I can, send it for critical review, see what the world thinks. Maybe serious scholars are going to find serious holes. Maybe everyone will agree and say, oh, well, no, you know what you're missing is this, and they'll show me exactly what I'm missing, and we'll now learn. And the cause of finding the truth will at least be advanced.
I agree with that.
Just missing that. And only by gathering up a wider and wider context of truth, including things that aren't true, right? And why they're not true. We've got to integrate all that if we have any hope of getting close to the truth. And as you pointed out many times, this is ancient history. We're talking 2,000-year-old stuff. We're talking fragmentary evidence. This is not, easy to figure out. And we are going to be tentative. We're going to be making hypotheses. We're going to be making theories. And especially in that kind of context, what we need to do is present our theories as best we can and present them for critical analysis and engage with others in a civil and civilized way that focuses on the topic and not one another and what our motives are and who's paying who. And that's absurd.
I think most of the time, James, I'm sorry to cut you off. I have to say this. I think most of the time what happens with theories, and I wish it was better in the non-believing community, because I expect it from people who believe, having a vested interest in these things for faith and whatnot, but I wish there was better communication among those who are not vested in that manner, so that personalities don't prevent the possible pride or ego that can cause you to really want to investigate a theory. That happens all too often in the field, which is why I and Mythvision try to connect scholars. I mean, let's keep it real. I'm not so sure if Dr. Price would have ever communicated with Atwell or you. You know what I mean? If it weren't for someone saying, look, these are great guys. Like, everybody's great here. They want to present their information, and they really appreciate your work. And then, of course, Dr. Price took into consideration listening. And, of course, he wrote his review of your book, and he read it, and he says, oh, this is really interesting with the whole synoptic.
And it is in that critical engagement that my thinking improves. That, you know, not only have we opened up Price's mind to another way of looking at things, perhaps, at least it's possible, reasonably.
Right.
And not only that, but by critically engaging with us, he'll improve my thinking. So in either case, we'll get closer and closer to the truth as time goes on, presumably, if that is our goal. And we have to be grateful for correction.
Well,
So far we've just talked about, admitting that we might be wrong and everything. I want to talk about Israel only. I want to talk about where we go wrong, where, Valiant thinks we go wrong, and we can maybe get into a little bit of that. I believe it's coming up soon where they might start diving into some of that, but let's see.
That's the Israel only theme that was the topic here. That we finally met our goal with Dr. Carrier. Like, it took a few days. It wasn't nothing. I really appreciate everyone's help on that.
They met their $700 goal. I think they had to pay this guy $700 to take a look at the Israel only viewpoint. So yeah.
Because now he's going to be able to spend some time on the project, which I hope.
That's great.
I'm not giving up hope down the road you won't be able to communicate with him too on your theory. But fingers crossed, you never know. But right now, we know that's on hold at the moment.
Well, let him do this first.
Right.
He's going to need time to do that. I know that at his request, we did send a copy of the book, and he's had it even longer. But I'm perfectly willing to wait. I'm a patient man and a patient cause. And I would look forward to critical engagement. That's why I send the book out widely to as many scholars who will listen as possible, because only through that critical engagement can we possibly hope, to get at the truth here.
I think it's important, obviously, to test those things, but I'm happy to have. Well, I've learned a lot from the Israel only guys. I will admit, I really have a lot. I've never took into consideration trying to examine the biblical text in such a way that they do. Do I think there's some issues? Sure, but I wish it wasn't a personality thing. It almost seems like if a book was written, and this is why I pressed on that, and I'm thankful I heard Jason DaCosta had someone who's going to write a book. Whether it's going to be sourced out.
Well, that's what I heard. So somebody emailed me, and I mentioned that on the show, that this guy wants to write a book about Israel only, and that his goal is to have it out by the end of the year. And I mean, honestly, now would be the time, with the whole COVID and everybody kind of locked down a little bit. And honestly, if I didn't have the house project going on, which has been eating up pretty much all of my time, along with work and everything that goes with it, I probably would have considered it, because you just have so much time. If this thing goes on, I mean, hey, if you're home and you're working from home, you're working remotely, life isn't as hectic, could be the time. But like I said before, it is a massive undertaking to not only write a book, but to represent Israel only correctly, to use enough evidence from the biblical narrative front to back, and also to untangle the web of confusion that's been built up before you.
Like, really intense or not, doesn't matter. Just get the theory out there, present what it is, have a couple other IOers before you actually publish it. Say, yeah, this is good in our book, this works as a theory, we all would stand behind this, and then you have something to actually stand on. But I think a lot of times what happens is personalities get in the way and stop or slow us down from really being able to discuss in an open manner. Because, look, you know as well as I know that there's an apologetics movement of IOers towards Christians. And they are trying to get Christians to leave the faith and realize that, hey, you're not an Israelite. This isn't...
Well, it's not that we're trying to get Christians to leave the faith at all, actually. It's just that we're interested in sharing what we've found to see what other people think of it. And, of course, we understand that in doing that, we're going to piss a lot of people off. There's going to be the majority that would never admit that it's true, even if they know it's true internally. They just couldn't. There's too many things in life. They're too vested. They have family, friends, whatever the case may be. But the intellects, the ones who are interested in truth, the ones who have the big picture mindset, will be able to see this, and a lot of them have jumped aboard. I mean, it's obviously gained a ton of momentum in just the, I don't know, let's see, it'll be 3 years this November when I first shared my first I.O. video on YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. 3 years this November. So in just 3 short years, it's sort of gained a little bit of a following, and and I think a lot of people are interested in it, and a lot of people are probably interested in it, but don't tell anybody that they're interested in it. I think you have a lot of closet IOers out there as well, and that's why Derek and all these guys are still talking about it, and why guys like Robert Price, Dr. Robert Price, doesn't want anything to do with it. Because it packs a mean punch. It really does. And so it'll be interesting to see what Dr. Richard Carrier says about it. But let's continue.
For you, the narrative isn't about you. It's first century. And even if it did open up, I've heard them say this, even if it did open up to people beyond Israelites, the story ended at 70, blah, blah, blah. Right. Now,
it does end at 70. So James likes to kind of scoff at that idea. But it does end at 70. When Jesus looked ahead and said, not one stone will be left unturned, he was looking at the temple and the city. And that's the last time you've seen that since. And he did, of course, encapsulate all of those things as happening in that generation and before some standing there died. So it does actually end at 70. That was when Mystery Babylon, the mother of all harlots, fell. And that was the apocalyptic, eschatological grand event of the New Testament. So there's no reason to kind of laugh and scoff at that. It literally does end at 70. And anybody who tries to argue that is going to end up really in trouble.
People who are... I was a full preterist, James, right? Which means I had hook, line, and sinker believed the end did happen in the first century because it was supposed to. So I was like, okay, it did.
Well, Jesus said it would.
Right. And
Point
so I
blank
said...
in all 3 of the first Gospels.
It would. And so why are critical scholars not realizing, when I deconstructed, why aren't they seeing it did end? Why can't they see what I see? And then when I talk to them, they're like, hey, buddy, we agree that it was supposed to end, but it didn't actually happen. And I'm like, hold on. So I realized, no, it did happen because we had defined terms in a certain manner in which they did. Now, some things did happen, written retrospectively, and some things may not have happened, maybe. So I started realizing, okay, there's more than one thing going on here. Right. It's not just one simple...
Right. There's a lot of moving parts. And frankly, the Israel-only part is easier to understand, and the mistakes that some people at least make with it are easier, I think, to refute than some of the preterist thinking, because I don't think that the Jesus apocalypse and the very insistent timing that the synoptics give for this glorious coming of the Son of Man in power, right? An adequate explanation. I think scholars should really consider that more. The preterists have brought up a point that has been inadequately dealt with when it comes to preterism, it seems to me.
Is he saying preterism or preterism? I don't know if James is saying that right. Could be wrong, but it sounds like he's saying preterism with an N in there.
I don't think their response makes much sense. The very basis that we have, the most important basis that we have for thinking everything wrapped up in the first century is that Jesus apocalypse. In my mind, though, that Jesus apocalypse has such a bold prediction with such specific details that it could only be a miraculous prediction. Not one stone shall be left on another. Armies in the clouds.
Right.
The false rebel messiahs. The siege conditions that are described, like the siege of Jerusalem, that would have, it's on all fours with Josephus' description of the fall of Jerusalem. In such detail, miraculous, dubious details like the armies in the clouds, but also the temple will be leveled to the point that there's not one stone upon another. Oh, okay, now that is a specific, detailed, concrete description that I believe could only have been written after the event. And but if everything wrapped up in 70, why would there be any reason to write about the event anymore?
Retrospective, yeah.
Exactly. So I don't think the logic makes sense. I think the Gospels, and indeed most of the New Testament, was written after 70. I think Christianity was just getting started.
So again, pardon the dog drinking water in the back, but James' view is that the Gospels and most of the New Testament was written after 70. So he's absolutely wrong about the ending. It did end in 70. That's when all those who are Christ were raised at his coming, and his coming was within that generation. So James has a story that clearly says that the coming of the Lord for his saints would take place in that generation and before some standing there died. And he thinks that these letters were written after 70. Debo, come on. Bear with me 1 second, folks. Sorry about that, guys. I had to kind of switch things up a little bit due to the dogs and the noise and everything. So I changed positions a little. I'm on a different speaker. So, if it sounds a little different, it might be a little clearer, louder, softer. I'm not really sure. But as I was saying, when we left off, we were talking about how James Valiant comments and obviously shows that he believes the letters were all written after 70 AD, and that's fine. We're okay with that too, us being the IOers, but that basically defeats Valiant's view, because his view is that the story is trying to serve a political purpose for Rome, right, and for the future. You just heard him, you heard him say that Christianity just began in 70 rather than ended. But that doesn't make any sense. If this is supposed to serve a political purpose and yet it's all about Israel's salvation, how does that work? Furthermore, the fact that the salvation ends at the coming in the first century when the temple falls drives a 6-inch nail into this theory. There can be no political purpose in a post-AD 70 world for a story that ended decades prior. That logic just won't work. Simply put, if the New Testament was truly Roman agenda or Roman propaganda, there's no sense in having the story conclude at the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, which according to James would have been some decades before these letters were supposedly written. Makes no sense. It seems to me like it's a mess. We know that all the ones who were Christ were raised at his coming, which was the end, which was the temple falling, and that cuts everybody else out. The time element must be stressed. It must be looked at, because these guys don't look at it enough. Derek tries to bring it up here and there and say, well, this is actually what it kind of says. Like, he throws that in there, and these guys just kind of, they don't really pick up on it, There is a time element that needs to be stressed in the New Testament, plain and simple. You're going to hear Valiant say, I think coming up here, if I'm not mistaken, that Paul doesn't really express the same sort of end urgency that Jesus did in the apocalyptic Gospels. And of course, we know that's absolutely false, and we'll get into that in a little while once he says that comment. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. But let's go back. Let's see what else he has to say regarding this.
On the other hand, Jesus insists that people there listening to him would live to see the events that he was talking about, apparently including the glorious coming of the Son of Man.
Okay, so he admits that was all supposed to happen within the lifetime of when this figure, Jesus, supposedly existed. So let's see what else he says.
Yeah, we've had this discussion too. Like when you start getting into actual critical scholars that have been examining these texts, and they start to consider dating on these texts, and you look at Paul, the consensus of the 7 authentic Pauline letters, suppose they are authentic, suppose they are the 7 that are pre-70, you are stuck with a conundrum. There's a conundrum here, James. And the conundrum is did Paul really know the future? I mean, you got a couple different options here. Because if he wrote in the 50s, as scholars say, these 7 authentic Pauline epistles are in the 50s. And what IO and full preterists have done, because I was full preterist hardcore for a long time, they take this.
Derek is still full preterist. Derek wouldn't Derek wouldn't argue that the New Testament doesn't depict an end. Derek knows better. But let's see.
Synoptic apocalypse, they see not one temple or not one stone on the temple. They see the earthquakes and famines. They see false Christ. The whole nine are listed. And then they go to Paul and they see, according to Acts, of course, which connects to the actual Gospels too. But they connect these. Oh, we had various earthquakes and famines. Oh, there are false Christ out there. Snap, there are rumors of war. There's all this stuff that connects. Now, this is Acts, which is
all this stuff that connects, right? But we're still skeptical of it.
It's also written by a gospel writer, Luke. So you got to ask yourself, is he really connecting? He might be connecting these two. But Paul himself believed the end was near. And if he wrote in the 50s, what end did he believe? Did he believe in a temple's destruction end? Did he really think that the
All right, so here's Derek bringing up that Paul also looked for an end, an imminent end that was coming. And let's see what James says about this.
Apocalypse was this 70 AD scenario, as full preterists are saying? Or is Paul's apocalypse being built upon in the fictional synoptics? So when you
Paul
look at that...
doesn't give us a date.
Right.
Paul doesn't give us those detailed descriptions of the temple's demise, or the false messiahs, or the siege of Jerusalem, or the armies in the clouds.
Paul actually gives quite a bit of that information, actually. So James says that Paul doesn't give a date. Paul's not really looking. Like, is he trying to water down the fact that Paul told these people in these regions that some of them would still be alive by the time all this stuff took place? Like, Paul wrote to the Thessalonians and told them that some of us will not die, or I'm sorry, I can't remember how he words it, but we shall not all sleep. In other words, we're not going to all die before we're changed in the twinkling of an eye. I mean, hello, is that not supernatural? Paul's talking about a time in their lifetime, right? What is it? Corinthians, he says, we shall not all die, but we'll be changed. It escapes my mind the exact wording right now, but you know what I'm talking about. Those of us who are alive and remain, I think is how he words it in Thessalonians. So he's writing to people and saying that some of them are going to be alive and remain for the coming of the Lord. The same coming of the Lord that Jesus predicted, supposedly, 10, 20 years earlier, whenever it was. But he's mimicking, Paul is very clearly mimicking the same words of Christ. Now, these guys would have you look at the molehill, right, instead of Mount Everest, and they'd have you say, well, look, he words it differently, therefore it's got to be nonsense. Why would he word it this way? But these are different people. These are different accounts. You're getting the whoever wrote the Gospels version of it. You're getting Paul's version of it. Okay, and they both admit that they think the Pauline letters are, legit, at least maybe even written before 70, or at least 7 of them. So anyways, let's get back to what they were saying here and see. But Valiant's trying to basically make the point that Paul didn't have an end time in mind. Of course he did. Paul said, what did he say? The time is short, live as though you're not married. Right? If you're married, live as though you're not, for the time is short. For the end of all things is at hand. Paul looked forward to a very soon time when they would all, the elect body collectively, be changed into immortal beings. Never die immortal beings. That's what he looked forward to. He looked forward to a ton of supernatural things, right? But Valiant would have you believe that he didn't know, that he wasn't sure. But it all, the beauty of the story, in my opinion, is in the minor differences, and how over here it's worded one way, over here it's worded a different way. But it's the same thing being spoken of. We don't have to speak in the exact same way and wording every time we speak to somebody. These are letters being written to different areas, okay, talking about different things. But you see the framework, intertwined throughout.
Or any of the details that Jesus gives in the Gospels. And that's one reason for distinction.
He doesn't give any of the details that Jesus gave in the Gospels. I just gave you about 20 of them. Paul describes the same angelic transformation that Jesus did. Paul describes the same coming in the clouds that Jesus did. Paul describes the same twinkling of an eye, caught up together type thing when the Son of Man would come back for his elect, right? And they would be taken. All these things, right? Paul's mimicking the very things that Jesus said. And here's James saying Paul doesn't talk about the same things Jesus did.
Distinguishing at least some of Paul's letters from the Gospels in that very timing. I mean, the Jesus apocalypse is one of the things that helped us date the Synoptic Gospels. Paul, like all Jewish apocalyptics of the time, thought it was coming, and it was coming soon. All you have to do is look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, and whatever date you give to the Dead Sea Scrolls, 100 BC or 60 AD, we do know that there were Jewish sectarians who believed that the battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness was going to happen. It was going to happen soon. It was going to go down. And something big is happening, and it's around the corner.
So now James admits that the Dead Sea Scrolls talk a lot about this same concept that I.O. talks about. Yet, for some reason, he still insists that this was written by the Romans, about some political agenda. It just doesn't make much sense. There's other texts from back then that describe similar things as what I.O. is saying. So why wouldn't this be a part of that? I'm just curious.
It's going to be a messianic advent and of some kind, a cataclysm, an apocalypse, a judgment of.
He's basically describing exactly what the New Testament says.
Some kind is going to go down. Say, Jewish apocalyptics, even before Paul. Paul is joining this movement. Paul is accepting the culture and literature of these people. To Paul, this is just the background context. Something big is going down. The battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness is going to happen, and it's just around the corner, and you better be ready. You can hear it. You can hear it in the Gospel's description of John the Baptist too, right? Make ready the path of the Lord here, because it's going to come down. The Messiah is coming, and we got to get straight with the Lord.
and so I think what happened with the church, just giving a tip off to this whole thing, in reality, right? Because one can go, these are fictional tales, and I agree to some extent. Not every book is complete fiction, in my opinion. I am open to the idea that there are Pauline letters that are being written to actual people in a certain time that actually are believing some of these things. Which, if this is what gets me, if this is all just fiction completely, did someone just pick up this book that was not an Israelite, wink, wink, that just said one day, let's make a church out of this thing? No, to me, there was an ongoing evolution of thought from probably a primitive Jewish movement that grew into a larger Gentile.
It's very true. It could be. I mean, it's not a bad guess, but I mean, who knows really how Christianity truly began and when it truly began. I mean, we don't really trust historical records from much else. I mean, why would we trust it saying that Christians really started in a certain time because of a supposed quote? I mean, there's so many questionable things. I mean, but at the end of it, somehow it was sort of, I think it's Mike Bradley who says it's a redemption narrative that was hijacked, is what it is, and that's exactly what it is. It's a hijacked redemption narrative.
Inclusive, and when I define Gentile here, I mean allowing people who are non-Israelite or just anyone who would accept the faith by then would become by faith.
I think we have to accept that something like Galatians is actually letters or pieces of letters or an authentic letter by someone. I don't imagine that Christians, any later Christians, would have invented the argument that Paul has with James and Cephas in Galatians. It's very heated, strong. Paul condemns them outright. They're going to hell. Apostles who knew Jesus
are cursed.
Are cursed. They're already condemned. My gosh, they're cursed. And,
no, he's just being mad at his brother. They're best friends. What do you mean, James?
He confronted Cephas to his face, and James was spying out his freedom in Christ.
Here we go again, where they're making a mountain out of a molehill, and they're kind of giggling back and forth because they're saying that this confrontation or this argument between Paul and James or whoever it was, they're saying that proves that there was contradictions in this story, or that the story doesn't flow. Right? I mean, there's a lot of confrontations in the story. Right? I mean, Jesus with the whip tables, with the whip flipping the tables, Jesus and Peter, get behind me, Satan. I mean, come on. Really? I mean, there can't be confrontations between two characters in a story. I mean, that's part of a story. That doesn't seem too far-fetched. The narrative can still continue. And like I said earlier in this little program here, the goal was always the same, right? I mean, Paul had to sort of ebb and flow with his with whoever was in front of him, his audience, but the goal was always the same. Paul became all things to all men. He became a Jew to the Jews, a Greek to the Greek, right? That's what he did. And so it was this mission to gather everybody back in. But there's not this huge divide as these guys want to make it. There's no contradictions. Okay, surely there were disagreements. Just like Derek and I have disagreements on things, there were probably disagreements between Paul and James. But that doesn't do away with the fact that it's still one story. Okay, it doesn't mean that the whole story is thrown off just because you find two people disagreeing about something. I mean, I don't know.
No. And it's angry. The language is very angry and heated. He doesn't care who these
heated
fellas are or what people think of him. I'll tell you the gospel I got from my own revelation is what's true. He's getting all, defensive about it and stuff. So that was not in Acts, they sort of gloss over and play down that whole argument. So it was already an embarrassing argument by the time Luke Acts was written.
Right. And he brushes over some of Paul's stuff,
By the way, that is not me coughing. That's James. Hopefully he's doing all right.
Paul doesn't care if you eat meat sacrificed to idols. But Acts 15
Acts sort of
damn sure does.
Some of that stuff,
yeah.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, he says you are not to eat meat. So which one is it? Is it okay? Is it not? Oh, you do not. And then, of course, the harmonizing method always comes in and finds a way. Well, he was only speaking to these people at that time. And that's why it didn't matter if but these people right here. Come on, guys. Give me the goggles. I need the goggles. But
I mean, it's quite simple, actually, if you think about it. I mean, Derek's a bright kid, right? Don't let him trick you, okay? This is showmanship because he gets it. He understands exactly the argument that I'm making here. Let me, I want to try to pull up the passage while I got you guys. Bear with me one moment. I don't usually do this because I'm kind of a off-the-cuff type passage guy, but let me see if I can find it. All right, let's see. Here we go. 1 Corinthians 9. All right. So here's what Paul says. He says, let's see. For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became a Jew, that I might win Jews. Notice how he doesn't say to Israel there, okay? He calls them Jews. He's speaking of that sect, that section, that fold, as Jesus calls them. And he goes on, he says, to those who are under the law, as under the law, still talking about the Jews, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law towards God, but under law towards Christ, that I might win those who are without law. So notice how he speaks of the Jews, this one group who is under the law currently, the circumcised, and then he speaks of another group of those who are without law. In other words, those Israelites who are without law, okay? Not being without law towards God, he says, but under law towards Christ, that I might win those who are without law. Right? So he's saying there's two parties that he's focusing on here. Those of the Jews and those of the Gentiles. Those with the law and those without. Okay, he says, then he goes on, he says, to the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be partaker of it with you. So Paul is basically saying that he's becoming like these men in order to win them back. Right? I mean, he gives it away. That's what he does throughout the story. He's the apostle to the nations. Do you think there's a special designation to that term? Or do you think that term means something significant? I think it does. I think that he's the apostle to the nations because he was going to have to sort of do what he just talked about, morph into different peoples and groups and just get downright and dirty about it, right? Without really caring too much. So he was the apostle to the nations, and that's what his mission was. It was to seek out the elect far and wide. this was the fulfillment of the promises of the fathers of old. The trajectory of the story shows that this is what was spoken of long before. This is the regathering of Israel from the nations, right? Finding them wherever they were, whether they were worshiping wood, stone, it didn't matter. And Moses predicted that this would be happening all throughout Deuteronomy. And Valiant's going to blunder here big time in a minute. Now, I said before, he's a sweetheart of a guy, all right? He seems very nice. But he's going to blunder again bigly, because he's going to say that nobody ever called the law a curse, right? And you know, those of you who are with me here, you're face palming right now because you're like, hello, have you read any of Deuteronomy? Have you read, I don't know, maybe the first 20 chapters of Deuteronomy, which literally all talk about blessings, related to the law, and what else? Curses related to the law. The law was a curse if they didn't abide by it and cherish it and hold it higher than all things. And that's laid out extensively by Moses all throughout Deuteronomy to the people of Israel. And the warnings were severe. They were serious, serious warnings that they would be cursed. It's just mind-boggling how they don't remember this. Do a word search on how many times the word curse is used in the book of Deuteronomy. Just do it for the hell of it. I'm going to Google it right now just to see. Let's see if it tells me. How many times is the word cursed used in, let's see, Deuteronomy. Let's see. Well, it says, I don't know if this is the answer, but it says there's 68 verses about curses and being cursed in the Old Testament. I don't know if that's the word cursed or just the context, but go and read Deuteronomy for me, chapters 1 to wherever you want to go, and just take notice of all the curse language. Go to Deuteronomy 28 to 32 specifically, and notice all the curse language. All right, so when they tell you that there's no such thing as a curse here, the law was never a curse, you got to bang your head against the wall, because that's actually all that's said in the beginning of the story. Again, it's just kind of knowing the foundation of where these concepts and things are coming from, and then you can start to plug them in. You know what I mean? But let's continue here.
See, that's the thing. These documents are not like they're consistent with one another. You know,
They are consistent with one another, though. They really are.
All kinds of inconsistencies between the authentic Pauline letters and the Gospels.
Right.
On the other hand, the Gospels and Paul...
You wonder, are these guys looking for, perfection, match up 100%? Their arguments are kind of weak when you really hold them up to the microscope, because they're essentially saying that, there's differences in the Gospels and Paul's letters, therefore this can't be true, or this can't be the case, or this can't be a salvation mission, or Paul couldn't be doing what Jesus talked about. They're looking at the little differences, right? And that's the one thing, when I listened to a couple things back in the day from Dr. Robert Price, about the contradictions in the New Testament, I was very unimpressed. And everybody was like, oh my God, that was so great, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting there kind of scratching my head like, man, this is crazy. That was not a very powerful presentation at all. He's looking at such fine-toothed details, right? And saying, that doesn't match exactly what Luke said. Luke said it differently. It's like, really? If these are supposed to be different people, they're all going to have different perspectives. They're all going to use different details. Not all of them are going to be, saying everything exactly alike. And again, I really believe that plays in the strength of the Bible, because you have the same framework. If you can see it, it runs through all the letters. Of course it does. But you also have these inconsistencies, these minor details that are kind of either added or left out or whatever. And it just makes sense as to how human beings would communicate, right? No two human beings are alike, besides Derek Lambert and James Valiant.
Also share certain things that are unique in all of Jewish literature, okay? That are definitely, something very different.
And I'm not trying to be an asshole, by the way. I like these guys. Like, I'm kind of a ball buster in general, so I'm like this with everybody. But, I mean, look, I got to call it what it is. I just don't find these arguments for creating Christ and these arguments against Israel only as strong at all.
As I've said before, a big elbow in the road. Paul is criticizing Torah. There is nothing in Hebrew literature before that calls Torah
the law a curse,
a burden, a slavery, a curse.
What?
Paul's language.
Wait, Derek just said there's nothing in the Torah, and James repeated it, that calls the law a curse, right? Just want to go over something for you here. Bear with me a moment. Okay. Deuteronomy. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 4. Let's see. Let's just read Deuteronomy chapter 4, and let's catch the power of how Moses, because this is just at the start of him talking to these Israelites and laying it all out. But look at how he words this, and just ask yourself if you were under this system that Moses is laying before these people, this ridiculously difficult system full of laws, full of requirements, full of burden, full of bondage. If you were under that system, how would you feel? Right? Would you feel cursed? Would you feel blessed? I mean, you make your own choice. But here we go. Verse 1. Deuteronomy 4. Now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the judgments which I teach you to observe, that you may live and go in and possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers is giving to you. You shall not add to the word which I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God which I command you. Your eyes have seen what the Lord did at Baal Peor. For the Lord your God has destroyed from among you all the men who followed Baal of Peor. But you who held fast to the Lord your God are alive today, every one of you. Surely I have taught you statutes and judgments, just as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should act according to them in the land which you go to possess. Therefore, be careful to observe them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples who will hear all these laws and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. So you can see Moses is preparing them for this responsibility that's going to be given to them. He's saying, be careful to observe these laws, because people are going to see you and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. Verse number 7, he goes on, he says to them, for what great nation is there that has God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us, for whatever reason we may call upon him? And what great nation is there that has such laws and righteous judgments as are in all this law which I set before you this day? So what is he saying there? He's saying there is no other nation that has this law. Okay? He goes in verse 9, he says, only take heed to yourself and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. And teach them to your children and your grandchildren, especially concerning the day you stood before the Lord in Horeb, when the Lord said to me, gather to me my people, and I will let them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children. Then you came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, and the mountain burned, blah, 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 and the Lord spoke to you, blah, blah, blah. So he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform the 10 commandments, and he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. And the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you laws and judgments, that you might observe them in the land which you cross over to possess. Now check this out. He says, take careful heed to yourselves, for you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire, lest you act corruptly and make for yourself a carved image in the form of any figure, male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground or the fish beneath, and take heed lest you lift your eyes to heaven when you see the sun, moon, blah, blah, blah. But the Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be his people, an inheritance, as you are this day. Furthermore, the Lord was angry with me for your sakes, and swore that I would not cross over. Take heed to yourselves, lest you forget the covenant of the Lord your God, which he made with you, and make for yourselves a carved image in the form of anything which the Lord your God has forbidden you. The Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. Okay? Now, that's just a taste of what's going on in Deuteronomy. Hold on one second. Because Deuteronomy is chock full of Moses basically doing that same thing. He's going over curses, right? Check out this. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 15. Talking about the law, look what he says to them here. However, Israelites, if you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees I am giving you today, all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. You will be cursed in the city and cursed in the country. Your basket and your kneading trough will be cursed. The fruit of your womb will be cursed. The crops of your land, the calves and all the lambs and the flocks. You will be cursed when you come in and cursed when you go out. The Lord will send on you curses, confusion, and rebuke in everything you put your hand to until you are utterly destroyed and come to sudden ruin because of the evil you have done in forsaking him. The Lord will plague you with diseases until he has destroyed you from all the land. The Lord will strike you with wasting disease, with fever and inflammation, with scorching heat and drought, with blight and mildew, which plague you until you perish. The sky over your head will be bronze, the ground beneath you iron. The Lord will turn the rain of your country into dust and powder, and it will come down from the skies until you are destroyed, Israel. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You will come at them from one direction, but flee from them in seven. And you will become a thing of horror to all the kingdoms of the earth. Your carcasses will be food for all the birds and the animals, and there will be no one to frighten them away. The Lord will afflict you with boils of Egypt, with tumors and festering sores and the itch from which you cannot be cured. The Lord will afflict you with madness, blindness, confusion of mind. At midday you will grope about like a blind person in the dark. You will be unsuccessful in everything you do. Day after day you will be oppressed and robbed, and no one will rescue you. You will be pledged to be married to a woman, but another will take her and rape her. Really? You will build a house, but you will not live in it. You will plant a vineyard, but you will not even begin to enjoy its fruit. Your ox will be slaughtered before your eyes, but none of you will eat it. Your donkey will be forcibly taken from you and will not be returned. Your sheep will be given to your enemies. Your sons and daughters will be given to another nation, and you will wear out your eyes watching for them day after day, powerless to lift a hand. Wow, this sounds fun. A people that you do not know will eat what your land produces, and you will have nothing but cruel oppression all of your days. Anybody see a curse here? The sights you will see will drive you mad. The Lord will afflict your knees and legs with painful boils that cannot be cured, spreading from the soles of your feet to the top of your head. The Lord will drive you and the king you set over you to a nation unknown to you or your ancestors. There you will worship other gods, gods of wood and of stone. Kind of sounds familiar. You will become a thing of horror, a byword, and an object of ridicule among all the peoples where the Lord will drive you. Sounds familiar. You will sow much seed in the field, but you will harvest little because locusts will devour it. I'm just going to skip forward here because this could go on forever. The foreigners who reside among you will rise higher in power, but you will sink lower and lower. All these curses will come upon you. They will pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed because you did not obey the Lord your God and observe the laws and decrees he gave to you. Did you hear that? Did you hear the because? Because you did not obey the Lord your God and observe all the commands and decrees he gave to you. Okay, now if you want to continue, let's just go a little further down to the bottom. Verse 58, if you do not carefully follow all the words of this law which are written in this book, and do not revere this glorious and awesome name, then the Lord will send fearful plagues on you and your descendants, harsh and prolonged disasters and severe and lingering illnesses. He will bring on you all these diseases. He will bring on you every kind of sickness and disaster not recorded in the book of law until you are destroyed. You who were as numerous as the stars in the sky will be left but few in number, because you did not obey the Lord your God. Just as it pleased the Lord to make you prosper and increase in number, so it will please him to ruin and destroy you. You will be uprooted from the land you are entering to possess. Then the Lord will scatter you among the nations. Now check it out. Here's the prediction. From one end of earth to the other you will be scattered. There, in those nations, from one end of earth to the other. From one end of heaven to the other, the same end of heaven to the other that Jesus talked about when he sent out the mission in Matthew 24 to gather the elect. Here's Moses saying, in those places, in the nations, you will worship other gods, wood and stone gods, which neither you nor your ancestors have known. Among those nations you will find no repose, no resting place for the sole of your foot. There the Lord will give you an anxious mind, eyes weary with longing, and a despairing heart. You will live in constant suspense, filled with dread both night and day, never sure of your life. In the morning you will say, if it were only evening, and in the evening you will say, if it were only morning, because of the terror that will fill your hearts and the sights that your eyes will see. The Lord will send you back in ships to Egypt on a journey I said you should never make again. There you will offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but no one will buy you. And then it goes on in chapter 29. These are the terms of the covenant that the Lord commanded Moses to make with the Israelites. And so the terms of the covenant, this is like a binding contractual agreement here. Okay, and did you just hear some of the stuff that I read from Deuteronomy 28? Would any of you ever want to be part of that? That pressure. Did you hear all the things that God said he would do to his own people if they screwed up and didn't keep that law first? Keep that law at the heart of it all. Right? God, that's a lot of pressure. Can you imagine being under that curse? And did you catch how many times the word curse was used in there? I must have read it at least 15 to 20 times. So Derek's saying Paul wouldn't have gotten anything of a curse from the law. Well, that's what the whole point of the Old Testament is, guys. Adam in the garden is a picture of the law. What do you think the tree of knowledge of good and evil is? Paul said the law gave knowledge of sin. The law gives knowledge of good and evil. The law gives knowledge of what's right and what's wrong. And without the law, there would be no knowledge, right? Well, that's what Paul said, and Paul alludes back to Adam. Well, guess what? Adam and Eve had no knowledge of sin until they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So somehow that tree is related to the law. It's the tree that gave knowledge of what was right and what was wrong according to God. And they ate from it, and they were placed under the yoke of the law, the burden, the curse. And I believe that that's what Adam symbolizes. No, I don't believe a literal serpent talked. No, I don't believe Adam's eyes were literally sewn shut, and when he ate, his eyes were literally open, and he could physically see. No, I don't believe that. I believe that this is imagery and symbolism representing that when he broke the law, that sin was imputed to him, and he knew that he was guilty. His eyes were open. He was ashamed. And those are the exact same things that Paul says when speaking in Romans 5 and Romans 7 about what happens when one breaks the law. Paul actually said sin is not imputed where there is no law. Paul actually said that the law gave sin its strength. Paul actually said that the law caused sin to sort of spring up and kill, right? It was powerless before the law. He said when the law came, sin lived and he died. So this is 100% a law story. And it's all right there. And these guys are just not picking it up.
It's really intense. Oh, James was spying out our freedom in Christ. And so that tells me that the argument in Galatians is actually of the moment. That is to say, if it's something that James and Paul are arguing about, it's not something that Jesus had previously settled, as the Gospels may claim. Something about kosher diet, say.
They're making such a big deal out of it, these little things that they're picking on. But the book of Galatians was written to Jew and Greek, right? It was written to Jew and Gentile. It was written to a group of individuals in Galatia, regardless of what they were, Jew, Gentile, or otherwise. It was written to a group that was there that was supposedly a batch of called out ones. That's what the church is. That's what the saints were. They were the ecclesia, the called out ones. And he's writing to them. Didn't matter what they were. They were together. They were a group. He's writing to that people group in the region of Galatia. And he tells them, doesn't matter if you're Jew or Greek, slave or free, if you're Christ, then you're Abraham's seed. And you're an heir according to the promise. In other words, you're a chosen one. You're one important mofo. You've been sealed, and you're coming home to Papa Goad. Cheers to Matthew Simon. Okay? So, these guys miss everything. It's like it goes right over their head. Now, do I think Derek misses it? No, I think Derek gets it. I think he's playing kind of both sides, devil's advocate. But I know Valiant, he's looking ahead like he don't have a clue what's coming out of his mouth.
Right, or implications about circumcision. No. Those may be in the Gospels, but reflective of Paul's existing.
Why would Paul command people to be circumcised if the whole point was that Christ was the end of the law to those who believe, right? It makes no sense. See, they say, well, a Jew would have never told people not to be circumcised, but they're not understanding that that's not what the New Testament is talking about. The New Testament has a narrative that everything's coming to an end. You have to honor that narrative. And like I said before, you must honor the time aspect, the timing aspect. Everything was coming to an end. So for Valiant to say that, oh, Paul was, very odd that he didn't require people to be circumcised. Well, if Christ was the end of the law, if he died for their sins committed under the law, he was the end of the law to those who believed. If he fulfilled the law for them, if he was the perfect sacrifice, and if all that was coming to an end and they were going to be transformed, they were waiting to be taken to this heavenly place. They were looking forward and anticipating that moment in their lifetime because they were promised. Then why would Paul tell them to go back to the law, right? What sense does that make? In essence, they were just kind of counting down the time, according to the New Testament. They were looking ahead to get to that moment of glory when this figure would supposedly come out of the clouds and whisk them away, and they'd be changed.
Torah criticism.
Absolutely.
One of the things about I.O. that I think they don't really see, in fact, I'll go back up and I'll be really broad about it. They have a lot of powerful insight. And Paul's use, for example, of the regathering of Israel, those prophecies. And there are prophecies, starting with Hosea, but also echoed repeatedly throughout Hebrew literature of a regathering.
Notice how he admits throughout Hebrew literature there are many prophecies about the regathering of Israel. But let's hear what the but is. There's always a but.
Israel will be regathered. There will be a redemption. Now, when, the prophets were writing 500 years before Paul, in many cases, there's still hope of a regathering of Israel. That was
correct.
Still a practical hope or possibility. As you point out, it may also reflect the fact that many Israelites did migrate south for safety and were regathered and did come back into the fold. But also, as time went on, it's simply bizarre to think that people who were truly blended into the Assyrian Empire would centuries later even know that they were descendants of Israel.
Well, they didn't.
Okay, so now this is what I want to talk about. So here's Valiant and Derek saying, I know, it makes no sense, right? How would these people still be out there, right? But neither one of them believe that the supernatural stuff of this story actually took place. That's the irony here. It's like they don't believe there was a real gospel mission. They both probably don't believe there was a real, superhuman guy named Jesus. They might be skeptical of that, I'm sure. I know they both don't believe in the supernatural stuff that the Bible claims. So then why can't they believe that the story portrays Israel coming back from the nations? Right? I mean, why is that too far-fetched for them to understand? They're okay with all the supernatural elsewhere. They laugh and kind of joke about the fictional aspects of this story and how these guys fly off to heaven or whatever the case may be. They joke about that because it does seem crazy, right? It's like it's very far-fetched. But then when it comes to the Israelites coming back from the nations, or at least stating that that's what the story is portraying in the last days gospel mission, they can't have it. And one of the reasons is this reason here. They go back to the land of how possible it is, right? As if it's a real story now. So they're jumping back and forth, right? Again, I'll repeat this. In the land of make-believe, anything's possible. So if this story is as supernatural as it seems, and it's just fictional for the most part, then why can't this be what it's saying? Of course it can. You can't go back and forth and say, yeah, it's all fictional, but that's not realistic about the Israelites still being out in the nations, so we can't have... No, that doesn't work. You're contradicting yourself. If it's a fictional story, then it can be supernatural the whole way through. And of course it is, because they're the only ones redeemed. Revelation 14. So that's something that I notice a lot of these guys do. Even Price did it. They laugh about the story. They say, oh, it's all, horse shit. But then when you tell them that, okay, I agree with you, it's fictional, but here's what those ones coming back from the nations actually means and who they are, they say, no, that's impossible. They couldn't have still been out in the nations. What? Right? It's banana sandwich.
Yeah.
A teeny percent, maybe like a Senator Warren's Indian ancestry, a teeny percentage of their ancestry centuries earlier, right, was Israelite.
By the way, we also have quotes from the first century from people like Josephus that do sort of actually confirm that they were out in the nations beyond the Euphrates. There's books, there's writings. One guy that used to communicate with me via email had sent me so many different things, and I just, people send me a lot of things, a lot of videos, a lot of, little clips, little articles, whatever, and I really can't read them all. I don't even read probably 10% of them because I just don't have the time. And I do read emails. I'm not talking about emails. I'm talking about like attachments that people want me to check out or YouTube videos that people want me to watch. It's just very hard for me to do that. So when I used to travel, I had a bit more time, but now I guess I don't. It's funny how that kind of works. But anyways, I can't remember where I was going with that. I don't know. I lost my train of thought. Too many rabbit trails, but let's see what else they say.
Well, okay, so you're 1/1000th Israelite. Would you even know that?
Oh, okay, I do remember now. So yeah, Josephus actually said they were out there. This guy that used to email me had sent me so many different things that prove that the Israelites were dispersed far and wide. And I guarantee you that any of you, if you do any kind of research in historical times and the Roman Empire back then, the Hellenization of the Israelites or the Jews who were literally dispersed into the Greek Empire and, Hellenized, just read the book of the Maccabees. There's plenty of evidence that Israelites were out in the nations, right? So trying to argue that is not going to go very far.
Especially if you've lost all of your traditional practices.
Which is why I have to...
Especially if you've lost all of your traditional practices. That kind of sounds like what Paul said in Romans 2, doesn't it, about these ones in Rome? He said, by nature, you Gentiles are sometimes doing the things commanded in the law of Moses. And when you do that, you show that the work of the law is written on your heart. Because remember now, this was a covenant designation at the start. The law was written on the hearts of the covenant people. Just answer me this. After what I just read you in Deuteronomy and how exclusive this law was for Israel, how could that same law end up on the heart of someone else living in Rome? It doesn't make any sense. What makes more sense is that this was a descendant of Israel who had somehow made it out to Rome, and the story is not concerned with how that happened. It just says it does. And you have that law inscribed on their hearts as a covenant designation. And here's Paul saying, by nature, you sometimes do things that are commanded in the law of Moses. And so you show that the law is written on your hearts, and you either accuse or excuse yourself. But that's exactly what it's talking about.
To give a tip of the hat to Jason, DaCosta, because he's coming along in the path which I think is going to require the position to go down, is the fictional route.
Well, I've been fictional for a long time now. I'm not, I mean, thanks for the tip of the hat, but I'm not actually, it's not a path. Like, I've been there for a long time. If you go back, and you can fact check this, I think I said this before, but if you go back 12, 18 months into my stories, you'll already see that I've basically admitted that the story's fiction. It's got some historical events in it, but it's fiction. So it was, could have been written after 70 AD, sure, but it's still a fictional story all about Israel, and it was written by somebody who was very, fond of that idea, that regathering of Israel idea, and it was created in such a way that, it's done the way it is. But yeah, let's see. But I've been open to fiction for a long time, and I've been confirming that on my channel. So I believe that it's IO fiction, basically. It's a story about Israel, and it's fictional. It reviews a lot of their historical things, like the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of Babylon, stuff like that. I mean, Old Covenant, the first Jerusalem by the Babylonians. But yeah, I mean, it's got some historical events in it, but it also includes a whole bunch of fictional, mythical type stuff, and maybe borrowed from other things. Who knows? But yeah, there's no new fiction here. I've been there. I've been IO myth or IO fiction for a long time.
That the Holy Ghost is just seeking out the lost. This is like a seed detector that knows the elect seed.
And Paul
yeah, it is. I mean, that's exactly what it is. Wait, hold on.
Suggests that. Paul says that if it's written in your heart, you are the elect.
Right.
Yeah, because again, that goes back to what I just told you about the law being written on the Israelites' heart, which was a covenant distinction. The Holy Spirit helper that Derek just referred to is something that I think Derek knows how important and significant that is, but he doesn't press it very hard with these guys, right? They forget, guys like James, Dr. Price, they forget that there's this being called the Holy Spirit. It's labeled the helper, and this being is actually helping these ones, supernaturally, by the way, locate certain individuals, the same certain individuals that Jesus earlier said he would not lose one of, and he would seek them and they would come. So this Holy Spirit is directing and guiding them and getting them to the places where they need to be. And they're becoming fishers of men. I don't believe Paul knew who his audience was. I think, he was just led to them. I think he probably walked up to the men in Athens in Acts 17 and just started preaching. And as many Gentiles that were appointed to eternal life believed. That comes from Acts 13 when he's preaching there. It literally says that Paul's preaching to a group, but only as many as were appointed to eternal life believe. Now that tells me that, again, the story is already decided. The characters are already there. Paul is taken to that spot for some reason, led there by the Holy Spirit, the helper. And so Derek doesn't place enough emphasis on this crucial point, because Jesus gives them this helper to complete the mission. Think about that. To complete the mission. Right? If this story is as Valiant says, and it was a political movement to unite and unify and keep peace for centuries forward after AD 70, why does the Holy Spirit helper come to help them complete the mission? Right? That makes no sense. The mission was going to be completed by the time of the temple being destroyed. Plain and simple. And that is the most devastating death blow to any kind of continued political movement view out there. They cannot get around the end. The end occurred. So when you stick your flagpole in that mound of sand called the end, you live and die by it, because there's no continuation after the end. It makes no sense to have a political movement that ends in 70 AD and you're there writing about it later, 100 years later, like Valiant might say.
Right.
How do we know that you're the elect? Well, it's written in your heart.
This is the thing I told Stephen, though.
Physical circumcision doesn't matter in Romans, right? It's a circumcision of the spirit. It's an inward thing of the heart. Circumcision.
Right. And that was always written about Israel, too. If you look back in the Old Testament, God was always talking about, circumcising their hearts, and, it was always about them.
Spiritual circumcision is what matters, and that's what Paul's doing. He's spiritualizing this stuff, including descent from Abraham, including membership in Israel.
That's the Christian view. That's the wrong view. He's not spiritualizing anything. Paul's going out and seeking them out. That's why he tells them in Galatians that if you're Christ's, it's proof that you're Abraham's seed. You're an heir. Congratulations, you're an heir, right? It would be like me kind of just like living out here in Rhode Island. And, I'm 70, let's say life goes by, I'm 71 years old. I've adopted all this crap from this location. I've become a Rhode Islander. I'm just kind of hanging out, watching old reruns of The Simpsons or something. And I get a knock on the door. I go to the door. I open up the door. There's somebody there. They say, Jason, congratulations. You're an heir of King Robert III. Right? And King Robert III had a promise made to him a long time ago that his ancestors would receive, that his descendants, would receive a payment, and he hands me $1 million check. Right? That's like what it would be like. It would be like me existing, not knowing, not really maybe having a feeling that something's different, but not knowing. And then all of a sudden, I'm told that I'm an heir. Hello, that's exactly what's taking place here. But they can't see it because they're too focused on the molehill, supposedly contradictions.
It's actually twisting the prophecy. There's nothing in the Hebrew prophecies that says, well, all aliens may be blessed by it, but all aliens now become part of the redemptive thing? I don't know.
See, that's true. All aliens were not becoming part of the redemptive thing, which is even more proof why what I say is true, is that these are actually Israelites.
It may be suggested in some ways, but Paul is definitely grabbing on the idea that now that Israelites have been mixed in with Assyrians, that means any Gentile can come in. And let's face it,
that was our point, yeah.
That really appears to be...
Any Gentile can come in, he says, Paul says. But Acts 13, Paul says, Acts 13 says, as many as were appointed to eternal life believed, when speaking of the Gentiles. Pardon me. So, anyways, there's a lot of mistakes here. Let's continue to see what he says.
Dr. Staples has really kind of shown this to my satisfaction.
Right.
So Dr. Staples has shown to his satisfaction that what the story is saying is that because the Israelites were out in the nations, the gospel message opened up for everybody. So because, it's almost as if it starts off for the elect only, and then it opens up for everybody. But that's a mistake. That's a mistake because at the end of the day, you still have the exclusive statements that limit this right down back to where it belongs, that take it from its, wild and sloppy understanding and sort of corral it in so that it's right where it needs to be, locked in on Israel. Places like Revelation 7, Revelation 14, Revelation 21. All showing that the Holy Spirit marking individuals was signifying that they were Israel. All showing that only they were standing in heaven singing the redemption song at the end. Only they. And they were the ones redeemed from the earth, Revelation 14. All showing that only the 12 tribes' names were written on the city, Revelation 21. And no one would enter in without their name being written in the book of life. Which was, again, I hate to say it, but again, it was an Old Testament thing. It was an Israel thing, the book of life. Just like the book of law was a thing. That book was going to be open and they were going to be judged according to what they did under the law. This was their whole thing. This was their whole, history, culture. So it really makes perfect sense if you just think about it, right? I mean, here we are. We have a section of writings in the New Testament that's chock full of Old Testament sightings and referring back there, pulling Old Testament passages that are all about Israel and applying them to certain things that are going on in the first century. And I'm here saying that it's about Israel's regathering and their redemption, but these guys are here saying, no, it's about something else. That doesn't make sense. I mean, you be the judge.
That's what's going on. Paul is taking over a pretty much defunct prophecy that has no hope of practical fulfillment 500 years on. And he's taking it and using it as a means to open the door to Gentiles.
So Paul's goal was using it to open it up to Gentiles. Yet, open what up? Again, the time indicators have to be paid attention to. What is Paul opening up if Paul says that it all ends at the coming? Remember, 1 Corinthians 15:22. Christ is raised as the first fruits, then those who are Christ at his coming, then comes the end. Let me repeat that. Christ the first fruits, then those who are Christ at his coming, then comes the end. So if you're Christ's, you were raised at his coming and then came the end. The same coming that he promised would take place in the first century at the temple falling before some of them standing there died. So Paul is, according to James, Paul is opening up this system, I guess, to Gentiles, but yet he's saying it's all going to end at the coming of the Lord. I trust you see the problems.
Great question. Is everybody touched by Israelites by this point? At least when I say everyone, God forbid, I don't mean...
Why are they still taking such a literal approach to this tale? They only take it literal when it serves them. Did you notice?
Aborigines, Indians in Australia. I mean,
they weren't
the
aware
table of nations.
Yeah. Obviously, they weren't aware of Native Americans or South Africans or East Asians. No. The world to these people is the Roman world in the Near East. Okay, and that's the world to them. It really is. The Roman emperors, for example, called themselves rulers of the world. That's how ancients perceived the world, is in limited geographical unit.
So then why would Valiant and these other guys be interpreting the world as meaning the gospel's going to the whole world, right? They again, doesn't make much sense.
It's as much of the world as we know, the known world, let's put it that way. The Romans rule the known world. That's how,
but he is correct on that interpretation, and us IOers hold true to those as well.
How we have to really look at it. The nations of the known world were the nations that Rome sort of occupied and dealt with. That's how it was viewed.
So that's a good question, James. I think that's an important point when we're looking at the New Testament. One can make the statement, just look at the narrative. Look at the narrative, and just what they're implying is look at the narrative, look at the Old Testament. They want you to read the New Testament narrative through the lens of an Old Testament prophecy.
No, not us. The New Testament wants you to do that, Derek. Not IOers. The New Testament wants you to do that by quoting Old Testament prophecy over and over and over and over and over and over again. And sometimes even as much as, 80% of the whole book is Old Testament imagery and symbolism and calling back, and like the book of Revelation is. Okay, 400 references to the Old Testament in that book alone? The book of Hebrews filled with Old Testament, allusions. It's, that's what the New Testament wants you to think, Derek. Not IOers. The New Testament wants you to read the New Testament through the lens of the Old. In other words, it's saying in Romans 9, who are these Gentiles that God is having mercy upon? Here's your answer. Bing, bang, boom. It's Israel. Simple stuff.
As if this is actually doing what the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament is saying, and not really take into consideration that when this document's being written in a Hellenistic period by Hellenistic possible Jews, which is very likely, the influence of what their Hellenism is causing them to document here by their reading of the Hebrew or the Septuagint is going to I don't think that's I don't think that's considered as an interpretive method by Israel only, which is what I think is super important when you look at a document. It's like if I pick up...
I don't understand. It could still be written by a Hellenized Jew. I'm okay with that. I don't really understand what Derek's point is. Right? Could it not have been written by a Hellenized Jew and been a story from that Hellenized Jew of a hopeful regathering of Israel from all the nations? Of course it could have been. That doesn't really defeat I.O. at all, actually.
A piece of literature from England in the 1700s, and I'm reading in modern America 21st century with my own understandings and things as I'm documenting something I'm reading from the 1700s, there's going to be a different. It's not
Absolutely.
The same thing, no matter what I do.
We have to take enormous care to read in our knowledge, our perspectives, our 21st century attitudes. That's what that's one of the main things we have to do when we study ancient history, is put on our ancient history lenses. How are these people looking at things? I've made the point many times. There's no difference in those days between religion and politics. If a war happens and somebody wins, we need a divine exploit, whatever our religion.
Valiant's mic is kind of blurring up here. We're going to wrap this up soon. I think I got about 12 minutes left in their speech.
Polytheists or monotheists, there's got to be a religion. What happened? Did the gods get irritated? Did Yahweh punish us? Did we somehow start idol worshiping and deserve this? But the idea, though, that the New Testament has properly or even close to accurately fulfilled the expectations of the Hebrew prophets is absurd on the face of it.
Nobody's saying that it fulfilled it in actuality or in reality, James. I mean, what are we even arguing about right now? IOers don't believe that it fulfilled it. IOers just say that it's speaking of fulfilling it. Speaking. Voice just cracked. I always say that it's speaking of that fulfillment. It's not that it's it's not that it's in reality has fulfilled it, right? I mean, I feel like these arguments are kind of bouncing all over the place. There's really no consistent argument against I.O.
There is no triumph of Israel in the first century.
And that's fine. Nobody needs there to be a triumph of Israel in the first century for the story to still be speaking of a triumph of Israel in the first century.
The reason why those rebel leaders were pretend or false messiahs is because they actually believed what the scriptures told them, the Hebrew scriptures told them, that a Messiah would lead the Hebrew people to victory here on earth. Israel would bring the rod to the nations, said Isaiah. There would be the...
Notice how James understands that there's a lot of literature that talks about this very thing, right? The Israelites being saved and redeemed and ruling and, all this chosen people type of stuff. But yet he can't for the life of him understand how the New Testament is speaking of the same thing. It's mind-blowing.
This glorious triumph where Israel is a blessing to all the nations, for sure, but they're large and in charge, like the glory days of Solomon, at least. Okay? There's going to be this glorious victory for Israel. If there's no glorious victory for Israel, then Isaiah's messianic prophecies don't seem to be accurately or properly fulfilled, and no such thing happens in the first century.
So now you got to change.
No such thing happened in the first century. Okay, that's fine, but I.O. isn't arguing for that. I.O.'s not arguing for that. I.O.'s arguing that this story, fictional or non-fictional, whatever your view is, for me it's fictional, this story pertains to the regathering of Israel, plain and simple.
The meaning, and I think it works out fitting with Platonic philosophy, influencing a Jewish mind, at the very least, because now you have Stoicism and Platonic thought. Is that even thought about?
Jesus and John can say, "My kingdom is not of this earth. My kingdom belongs to another dimension altogether."
Is that
Messiah
Hebrew?
doesn't pertain. Oh no, that's Plato.
Right.
Obviously,
so
there's nothing.
This is important when you're interpreting. Is my point.
Right, exactly. But you can see how someone like Philo, a first-century Jewish philosopher, who knew his Plato and knew his Stoicism, but also was a Jewish scholar and knew his Hebrew scriptures, how he saw things allegorically. Aha! So if Daniel says the Son of Man will come in glory, meaning Israel will have a glory day, and that's really what it means. Israel will have a glory day. They didn't actually.
And that glory day is spoken of in the New Testament. Trust me.
Whoever's writing Daniel didn't actually mean there'd be a dude, a son of man, glory in the clouds. That's all part of his dream with the beasts and so forth, which is all allegory. So, plugging in that allegorical thinking with Daniel, you can imagine, there's this spiritual level that's going on. So we can read everything in two sort of ways, a literal way or this totally spiritual way. Which Philo has. And boy, Paul seems to have picked up on that big time. He is taking these prophecies and abusing a good deal of the language in them, even to accomplish what he wants to do. For example, the
What was he trying to accomplish besides gathering the elect before the end? That's all he talked about.
Gathering prophecies. You go back to Hosea, who, the prophet of Israel, who says, yes, there'll be this fall. God will divorce his wife Israel, but don't worry, one day they'll get back together. But what will bring them back together? What will cause them to remarry? God will remarry Israel. Why? How?
Right.
Because they'll go back to...
And you don't think that bride adorned for God is Israel? It's hilarious.
Torah orthodoxy.
That's every depiction, even of these. This is the interesting thing. When you go to the Hebrew Scripture to find the regathering, even the regathering comes back to Torah. So this is what's like. You gotta really.
But Paul
consider
is saying we're now free in Christ.
But see, that's a big red flag.
Paul is saying you don't have to be circumcised in the flesh, just in the heart. Paul is saying forget circumcision.
But the Old Testament prophets also said that as well. So it's nothing. That's actually nothing new. See, they may not know their Old Testament well enough. It could actually just boil down to that. I mean, maybe they've spent time reading too many of these outside documents and haven't paid enough attention to what's said in the Old Testament, because the prophets, the Old Testament prophets, maybe even Moses himself, I know for sure the prophets have always said that circumcision of the heart, the Israelites needed that, and they would get that. So there's nothing new here. Paul is just citing Old Testament concepts.
Circumcision, kosher diet. He's saying we now have this new relationship to the law, he's arguing. He argues in multiple places, and it's maybe the central argument for Paul. We're now free from the law, thanks to the death and resurrection of Christ.
Correct. He was the end of the law to those who believe. Yep.
Christ's death has reoriented everyone to the Mosaic law. No previous Hebrew writer had ever, and it claimed to be Hebrew, had ever said that the law was a burden, some form of slavery.
Oh, no. What did I just read you guys from Deuteronomy? Was Moses, or whoever wrote that, were they a Hebrew writer? I think so. Did you catch the power of what that law entailed and what would come as a result of them not keeping that law with all their hearts, mind, soul, and strength? Like I said, I only read the tip of the iceberg for you. Read the book of Deuteronomy. Start in verse 1, chapter 1, and just go right through it, and maybe make a little check mark every time the word cursed is used, and maybe make a little check mark every time you think in your mind, holy cow, this had to suck. Okay? And you'll see exactly why it was a curse and it was bondage.
Right. Some form of curse, yet that's the very language that Paul is using. We're now free.
Yeah, because Paul was very familiar with Deuteronomy, was he not? I mean, he quoted it many a times. He takes it all the way back to Adam in Romans chapter 5. Paul knew the Old Testament writings, and he knew what Moses said about them. Right? What did Paul quote in Galatians? He said, cursed is he who doesn't continue to do all things written in the book of law and keep them. Well, that's exactly what Moses and Joshua said to the people of Israel.
From the burden of the law, thanks to Christ's sacrifice. Nothing like that was anticipated.
I could see a Hellenistic Jew, though, coming on the scene and saying, look, it's obvious we're not able to keep this law, and if we don't, we're going to have a problem. We're just going to keep getting judged, so something else needed to happen.
To this day, keep that law, though. In other words,
I'm just pointing out what.
That's one of Valiant's lame arguments, that there are Jews today that keep that law. No, they don't. And even in the law that the Jews keep today is nothing like the law of biblical times. Nothing at all. Go look at the law, the Torah. Look through the 613 laws and tell me if the Jews today do any of that. They might do some of it. Tell me if they do 20% of it. Tell me if they do 10% of it. Okay? But yet James says they still do. Well, they weren't even doing that law back then, and that was the whole point of the New Testament. They weren't even abiding by the law back then when they actually had a temple and had it. And that was the whole point of this mission. Hebrews 9:15, he died for sins committed under the covenant. Very, very clear.
Hellenistic.
Right. It was the practical needs of Paul's Gentile mission. Getting rid of the specifically Jewish strictures, like kosher diet and circumcision, however important, fundamental, and essential they are to Jewish practice, means the covenant of Abraham, circumcision. Paul is going right to the heart of the most basic, fundamental, definitive practices of what it is to be Jewish, and saying, it doesn't really matter. Why?
I think that's it.
Yeah, and see how he says to be Jewish, because we're not talking about being Jewish, James. We're talking about being an Israelite, which trumps being Jewish. Didn't matter if they were Jew or Greek, slave or free. If they were Christ, then they were an Israelite, and they were an heir. That's what Abraham's seed means in the story. It means Israelite.
Interesting, because his enemies, Paul's very enemies, are trying to Judaize Paul's audience, which is a big, huge, that does a whole other thing with the interpretation.
It is clear that there was missionary activity by Jews in the first activity. There were non-Jewish converts. Another thing I.O. seems to imply...
Before 70?
Yeah, exactly. Is that before 70? Well, we all know it even...
Of course there were non-Jewish converts. If you're not a Jew, then you're non-Jewish.
And if you convert to Judaism, then you're a Jew. It's very easy. That's again why we're not talking about Jews. He's using the term synonymously with Israel, which is a huge mistake.
Even I.O. has to concede that there was a bunch of interest right after 70 by Gentiles.
Right.
It's called the
Right.
faux Christianity of the Roman world that they dismissed, right? The
Right.
universal Christianity that the rest of the world picks up on. Well,
Right.
No, even before 70. It didn't just magically start in 70. Or at the end of the first century, we know there was interest. We know there were converts. Josephus describes Syriac people in the Near East who were converted to Judaism. He
Who's talking about being converted to Judaism? Nobody is. Not a single person.
describes Greeks and Romans who were converted to Judaism.
Is this supposed to be news?
We know that Seneca, the philosopher, who echoes the golden rule of Rabbi Hillel, was interested in the substance of Judaism.
Yawn.
It could be that Nero's second wife, Papa, was converted to Judaism. We have all kinds of evidence from Josephus and others that Gentiles were being converted. It wasn't taking over the whole empire, but we do know that a large empire, which Rome was, had a whole bunch of people who were interested in, and some converting to Judaism.
But this isn't about Judaism, James. This, again, is about the regathering of the 12 tribes of Israel, which actually has not a lot to do with Judaism. They were everywhere, near and far.
And at different levels. Some weren't getting circumcised, but still going to synagogue and worshiping and praying Yahweh, but not going the full circumcision route. But traditional Judaism says you're not a member of Israel until you go the full circumcision route.
But why does James still say, right? James still says that Judaism is still being, he says traditional Judaism. Notice how he makes the distinction. He said that there's still Jews today, but I personally don't think that the Jews today look anything like the Jews of biblical times.
And it's that difference, that sectarianism. The Romans really didn't like that. They thought that the Jewish people thought they were superior, and they separated themselves out, were better than everyone. And
well, that's because, according to the story, God did tell the Israelites that they were.
So they're haters of all mankind, is the way it was put. They're antisocial, right? Look at what Paul's doing along those lines. No. You can eat with Gentiles. You don't have to be circumcised. Oh, and peace with Rome, Romans 13, right? So a lot of the things that must have been an important part of first century messianic
Peace with Rome, Romans 13, because he's writing to people living in Rome.
Judaism, right? Torah, orthodoxy, a strict sectarian identification of Israel. See, Israel only's right about that. There must have been Hebrews in the first century who were so sectarian about their Judaism, right? The rebels, for example, now this isn't exactly I.O., and this is what they really have to look at. Even the rebels, who must have been ultra-conservative Jews, would allow allies to help them out and join their cause against Rome, but only if they got circumcised. Circumcision.
So I think I see our problem here, James.
I don't really
I got to
see the
comment
point,
for a second.
but-
Give me 1 minute, because this is important.
Yeah,
I think what I'm going to... No. Look, everybody knows that James is my brother, but you guys really don't know how tight we are. I mean, I can call him about anything. But James even tells me, he's like, cut me off if I keep going. But I'm doing this because I think it's important. I like what Jason DaCosta is trying to do by saying, look, you got dead people rising, you got blind people seeing, a lot of fictional mythology here with resurrections, and they're supposed to fly off into the sunset as divine beings, as angels of God, so to speak. Israelites are now, the 144,000 are now never going to die, and it's fictional. And we agree with this. I think the problem is going to come down to, when you're looking at, is there any history in this, what I like to call historical fiction? And I do think there is something there. Convoluted at best in Acts and the Gospels, but there is something here that I think needs to be understood in the context of the first century, and of course the wake of the second. But I want to read something to anyone who might be Israel only, who might be checking this out, or anyone who's interested, who's never looked at this. Dr. Richard Carrier, when I approached him on the subject, of course, I'm sure a lot of IOers know I'm a skeptic, and they know that I don't buy it, and I'm like, okay, I'm open-minded to certain things, but I don't draw the final conclusions the way they do, things like that. they probably, and I know I'm not going to say they probably, based on my reactions, by having Dr. Carrier take into consideration of doing this project, a lot of them seem like they're bracing for impact. They seem like they're like, oh God, he's about to just come and attack IO. He's just going to fail. I've had a lot of people who've trolled me already that are like, he's just going to fail, just like Dr. Price, and they're just like slamming this whole thing like, you're wasting your time. And
I did kind of say that to Derek. I said, when Derek reached out to me telling me that Dr. Carrier was going to take a look at it, I said, because I don't really know that. Well, I guess I did kind of know that he was open to the idea of it and that we shared some similar things in regards to the angelic nature of the elect in the end and all this stuff. But I just figured that he was going to kind of try to come out swinging, which he may or he may not. I don't know. But I just told him, I told Derek, I said, it's going to be a lot like Dr. Price. Dr. Price came, tried to answer IO and was pretty much dumbfounded. Now, I don't think Carrier will be dumbfounded. I think he will present a heck of a lot better than Dr. Price did when looking at it. But I just don't see much difference in terms of what he's going to bring versus what Price could bring. It's probably going to relate a lot to, traditional Christian views and maybe arguing from that standpoint when we're not operating from the Christian viewpoint standpoint, basically, I guess. But let's continue to hear.
Thinking to myself, I feel like I'm actually doing them a service. Any publicity is good. But secondly, listen to this comment that Dr. Carrier wrote me in a private message. After I said, please, we can't wait for you to join and get into this subject. He says, sounds good. And be aware, as I mentioned in the first place, the idea that maybe Paul thought every Gentile was actually a lost Israelite is plausible. I don't know how probable it is, but it's not silly to contemplate. So my a priori position is not strictly hostile to the idea. I just am skeptical it can be proved to any usable probability, but we'll see. So
that's a cool comment by Carrier, which I guess this is probably the first time, but that I've heard of something like that. But he put out that comment to Derek saying that he thinks the idea is plausible and but just doesn't know how probable it would be. Well, again, this is my thing. It's like we're not looking at a story for how probable it could be in real life, or we're not looking at this story as in that's not very likely to happen in real life, right? We're looking at this story as a fictional tale, and I believe Carrier does as well. I could be wrong, but I believe he looks at it as a fictional tale, and so the probability aspect, I don't know if that's going to really hold up to scrutiny because, again, in the land of make-believe, anything's possible, right? So it just makes more sense to me that this would be what Paul is doing, since he actually defines the Gentiles as the lost tribes of Israel, or as the house of Israel, or as the children of Israel. Romans chapter 9. Couldn't get any more clear. So probable, I don't know, but it's good to know that he actually thinks it's plausible and it's not a silly idea, he said. So that's getting somewhere.
He's not an enemy of the idea that these Gentiles could be Israelites. Right. The problem is he said in that comment, maybe all of him, like all the Gentiles that he bumps into that are accepting this message, he is then probably logically conclusion, well, the only reason they would accept it is that
lost Israelites.
That's a possibility.
Thank you. See, Derek understands my view because he just explained it. All the ones that Paul was taken to, he refers to as bumped into, were led there by the Holy Spirit. He cast out the fish, the fishing rod, and he reeled in whatever fish bit. And these are the ones that Jesus said were the sheep not of this fold, and the sons of God scattered abroad in the Caiaphas prophecy. This is the 12 tribes scattered abroad of James, the elect of the dispersion, and Peter. These are the sons and descendants of the fathers who passed through the Red Sea of 1 Corinthians chapter 10. These are Israelites. And he gets it.
Sir, and there's nothing definitive really. Even if there was something definitive on that, I'm not sure it would substantiate all of Io's claims, right?
Right, of course.
Because look, you and I could believe that Paul thought
And still not
all
be...
his Gentiles. Right.
Right. Io has a lot of different stuff that comes in that's this two-house theory that implies no one outside is
right.
a recipient of
all
things.
Israel stuff has to be thought about carefully, right? Are all Israel the elect? The 144,000? No. If all Israel isn't elect itself, then obviously then we have to say, what is Israel?
All Israel is the true Israel of God. That's what Paul calls them. I think might be Galatians. It's the remnant within.
Who can join Israel? What is properly Israel? And, the Gospels are full of all kinds of suggestions that I think are extremely uncomfortable to I.O. Jesus says that God can make descendants of Abraham out of stones. Right?
Did he?
That's extremely, extremely symbolic. It shouldn't be taken the way that James and others try to take it. Jesus was dealing with prideful, snotty-nosed Jews, and they were claiming or appealing to their father being Abraham, and they were some special status because of it. And Jesus looks down at the rock and says, I could make sons of Abraham from this stone. That's really all it's saying. It basically meant not all Israel is true Israel. Like Paul said, it's like just because you're a Jew doesn't mean you're of the true Israel of God, right? Only a remnant was. It wasn't to Abraham and to his seed through the law. It was to them through faith. It still doesn't extend beyond the seed. So that's not a problem at all. That's a very weak attempt, and one that I.O. has taken head on for many, many years now.
I mean, look, why would he say it?
Maybe not years, a few years.
Why would he say it? Right? So according to the fiction, maybe that's what he means he's going to do.
Why would he say it? They're laughing at why would he say it. I don't know. He spoke in parables. He spoke in imagery and pictures and symbolism. I mean, this is all he does.
Create Israelites out of stone. Who knows? Because, I mean, the implication I heard, there's two different ways of viewing the Galatians 3 idea. According to the standard view, and this is like even Dr. Jason Staples practically accepts this concept, that by faith, notice that you say, like Calvinists do this with Arminians all the time, it is grace through faith, not of works. And they're like, well, it is by faith that someone then becomes a son of Abraham. And
a true descendant of Abraham.
Right. So Israel only says,
Israel
only says you must first be a descendant, and then by faith you're an elect descendant
wait a minute.
of Abraham.
Paul is saying that Abraham and the patriarchs were saved by faith themselves.
Right. Paul's argument.
Okay, so again, I.O. is correct. The passage that I just proved that with is Romans 4, I think 13 or 16. But it says the promise wasn't to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through faith. So in other words, it still doesn't go beyond Abraham and his seed. The promise was to Abraham and his seed through faith. Okay? It wasn't through the law, but it was through faith. So it never goes beyond the seed. It never goes beyond Israel. Abraham's seed, the blessed people, was Israel in this story. They were the ones that, when God promised Abraham that his seed would become like the stars of heaven in number, that's Israel. Moses fulfills that when he says to Israel, you've become like the stars of heaven in number. King David said that to fulfill the promise made to the fathers, Israel, he didn't count the children of Israel under 20 years of age because the Lord had promised to make them as the stars of heaven in number. That's the promise that was made to Abraham about his seed, and this is Israel fulfilling that promise. Israel was always Abraham's seed. Isaiah has a passage flat out that says, you, Israel, Abraham's seed, my friend. Israel is Abraham's seed. They are the chosen ones. They're the blessed. If you bless, curse if you curse. Right? That's them. And if you can't tell by Moses' words to them in the beginning, then you need a head examined, because he flat out says it over and over and over again. You're better, you're chosen, you're high above. He loved you more than everyone. He set you far apart. He's giving you this law. Be careful. Okay? So yes.
So if it's open to Abraham, who's not a descendant of Abraham,
well, yeah.
Another silly argument. Again, looking at a fictional story with a fine-tooth comb is just not going to get you very far. Okay, these are abstract concepts. There's an abstract framework in line, and you can't look at it very closely, because if you do, you're going to find a ton of things that just don't make sense. It's a supernatural story, and it doesn't give you all the answers, plain and simple.
Paul, well, no, seriously.
They're going to argue that, though.
You can argue that, but there's nothing implied. I mean, in other words, Paul's argument would seem to suggest, well, gee, if Abraham could be redeemed by faith before there was any Mosaic law, then why can't I?
He's missing the point. When Paul talks about Abraham being being justified before circumcision in Romans 4, I believe it is, he asks the Israelites there, he says, what did our father Abraham find according to the law? In other words, if you're uncircumcised, it's okay right now because even our own father Abraham was justified before he was circumcised through faith. So that's what's important right now. But it still doesn't extend beyond the seed. This is what I'm talking about. The promise was through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and on to the 12 tribes.
I can be redeemed by faith, and that's it. It's by faith. It's by, Abraham was the obedient and the faithful one. I see, so by being faithful, by grace, I can become a descendant of Abraham. Why not?
By grace and faith, you can become a descendant of Abraham. That doesn't even make any sense. Like, what kind of religion is that? Why would the word descendant get changed, right? Go back to Genesis 12, 15, and 17 and read about the descendants. The promise was to Abraham and to his descendants, to his seed, descendants. It actually says they will come from the loins of your body. Folks, think about this. Abraham, the promise to Abraham that he would have a child was fulfilled when they were old. They were old and wrinkly. But God came through with that promise and gave him a child. A physical child from his loins is what he gave him. And through his descendants, through that child's descendants, and the seed would go forth, and more descendants would come. And that's the whole point of the story. It doesn't change. It doesn't delineate from that. Through your descendants, you will be blessed. Your descendants will become as the stars of heaven in number. That's Israel. Your descendants will rule over kingdoms and blah, blah, blah. That's Israel. Your descendants will be highly favored and blessed above all. That's Israel. Okay? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay? So that's what we're looking at here. Now, I'm about 52 minutes in here. Okay? This audio has gone on now for close to 2.5 hours, so I need to cap it. I'll probably listen to the rest of this, and if there's anything worthwhile, maybe I'll put out a part 2. But I just figured I'd interact and engage some of these points a little bit, give you guys some driving content. 2.5 hours, you can at least drive to work and back at least a few times. And maybe you want to check it out and just, hear what was said. If not, no worries. But if you did stick it out and you made it this far, thank you. Don't forget to give it a like, and we'll catch you guys on another episode. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.